Thank you all for coming to the March 20th UDAAP meeting. The first item is the return of the Tivoli Eco Village Master Plan. I'll pass it over to the chair, Pavlina.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. I am also experiencing some technical difficulties, mostly my bandwidth. I will keep my camera off, but I am here. And in fact, I would like to ask Sharon if she can fill in for me if for any reason I happen to drop off. Sharon, do you mind moving things along? Thank you. Hopefully not, but welcome again. We're all here. We made it. It's that kind of day with technology, but we'll get through it. We look forward to seeing the iteration of your project and the development. This is its second presentation. We saw it just recently. Nevertheless, it's important as a matter of a follow-up presentation to focus particularly on the panel's comments and how they've been addressed. I saw in your draft that was already organized in that fashion. Please spend your time walking through the panel's comments and the related adjustments to the design. As before, we would like to give about 25 minutes for this presentation. This will give us some time for Q&A and comments right after that. Without any further ado, please take it away.
Sure. Well, first, let me first very quickly thank everyone for getting us back in quickly. I want to quickly thank our team for getting us a quick turnaround. I certainly think you all will find that we've done I believe, a good job in trying to give feedback and responses to the great ideas and the great information that we got at the first UDAAP. So with that, Kristen, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you take us down this road.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, really exciting. Glad to be back. I guess also just to update the panel members, the project has made their official concept PUD submission. I know we've been working with Caitlin on that. So we are the first guinea pigs to go through the new PUD process. So all of this work is tying in nicely with the information that we are now providing for the PUD concept. So we are definitely moving along. Some of this we did see last time as I go through. What is an eco-village? We felt like it was important to leave this information in here just in case anybody was reviewing it for the first time from a public standpoint. We have updated some of our precedent images, which I feel like are also really nicely evolving and really starting to dial into the type of homeowner and the environment that we're really looking to create here. So again, project overview, I think we did talk about this previously, so I will just, everyone has that information. This is a new precedent image that we did add in regards to the pedestrian muses, and I think it probably very accurately starts to show how we think the muses are going to work along with the housing typology.
Kristen, I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you mind full screening the slideshow for the duration of the presentation?
Yes.
We're seeing your entire software, so maybe if we can go to full screen and then we can exit back here with thumbnails once we get into the Q&A so we can flip through pages. Sure. But it'll be good to maximize it on screen.
That's the crosshair.
Okay, if you can't find it,
I'm sure there's a way to do it, and if anybody can walk me through it, I am happy to. Caitlin, are you familiar with anything with a way to get this?
I think if you go to View, under the View tab,
Feels like there should be something that says presentation view or something, right?
It was there.
Yeah, I don't see it.
Maybe under.
Is it maybe on the bottom left of your window screen? There's a few. Yeah, maybe that one. Try that one. No. Okay. Never mind. We'll work with.
Let me see. I just got a note from my tech staff that said F1.
This is bigger. Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay.
It's okay.
Let me turn off these horrible crosshairs that I've somehow managed to turn off. I turn that. Okay, fantastic. All right. I do apologize that I know that's always a challenge when presenting virtually is getting all that information pulled together. Goals and objectives, again, has not changed, but we left them in because we felt like it was an important thing. We did update this slide just to little more graphically show the quarter mile walk and the half mile walk. You can see the half mile walk does take you right into Clifton Park and all the amenities that are over there. Site, so just a refresher of our site extents. This is just, again, city code map. Some existing photos. These have not changed either since the last presentation. And some views of the surrounding neighborhood and looking over to Clifton Park. Again, this has not changed too much either. This, again, just gives you a sense of connectivity for vehicles as well as mass transit with the buses and the signalized intersections where our site would connect over to Clifton Park. Again, just our open space diagram. And this is our updated master plan. We will go into this a little bit more, but we did want to get that into the front of the presentation for everyone to look at. So I think this gets into the heart of what we heard from UDAAP last time. This is just a summary of all of the comments. This is just a quick side-by-side presentation of the master plan that we presented beginning of January versus where we are today. So I'll go through the design changes that we made based on the comments, and then we can dial back. So the first comment that we had gotten was really about this central green space. And you know, I think we all were responding to how nicely this central green space really felt like it wanted to be in the middle of the site. And so as a team, we really did go back and studied that again and really tried to understand why had this green space shifted from the central location to this space that's more, you know, that's adjacent to Tivoli. And as we looked at it a little bit more deeply, one of the things that as we got into the design development is we have quite a bit of grade change that's adjacent to Tivoli right here. And putting the park and this open space in this location allows us to mitigate that grade change and actually really work with those contours in a way that actually become you know, a nice design opportunity in the park from a grading perspective. Whereas if we were trying to put a flat house on that space, it would be a little bit more challenging. Also, just the efficiency of the grid network. You know, some of these other plans that had a very central green space in the middle really required us to build a lot more infrastructure, just roads, to navigate the community. And so we really felt like this design that we had worked on really helped to minimize the amount of infrastructure to the existing network of Tivoli, Fenwick, and Hugo, whereas some of these other designs were really, you know, requiring maybe more infrastructure to be built than we really felt like we wanted to build. We really wanted it to be more green, more pedestrian oriented. And then I think the really big thing that really came out of our study of this was that one of the, critical things to phase one is we have to build what I call the brain for the microgrid. We have to build a building where the batteries and all of the controlling networks for you know, pulling all the solar energy off with the PV panels, it all feeds back to the clubhouse, which is right here in which is adjacent. So we've integrated that brain, that microgrids area, which is a back of the house function, into the overall clubhouse function. And that is a lot of the reason that it is, you know, our green space makes a lot of sense here, because this is in phase one for us. And you know, if the green space again was centrally located, it really would have, the phasing and the way that we need to bring the houses online, this was just not aligned with that. So there was a lot of reasons that I think that this location for the green space makes sense, as well as you know, why it kind of ended up over there from a from a site design, from an evolution standpoint. So there was a couple of 3 or 4 factors that were, as the design team was working on the plan, that we moved the open space to that area. Should I keep going through the comments, or do you guys want to wait to give comments at the end?
Please keep going. If anything, once you finish kind of these item per item ones, maybe you can go over that side by side and just summarize them on there. And then we can just continue with your presentation. We'll ask questions, comment at the end.
Okay.
Thank you for checking in. I appreciate it.
Yeah. No one's afraid to speak up here. Yeah, so great. Yeah. This one was, the next one was, there was a conversation about ADUs, and the design team completely agreed. The ADUs are a really great option for the homeowners. And so we actually went back and added another housing typology. And so it's a larger home that would be, it's this detached single family home that would then have the option of an ADU in the back. So what we did was we actually located that housing typology along Tivoli, where we have the little bit of the longer lots. So we wanted to just provide a little bit more space on those sites that would, if the homeowner would like to, that they could, construct an ADU in their backyard. If the homeowner was not going to construct an ADU, it would just simply be a parking pad with the solar canopy and would be typical of the other single detached family home. So it does provide us with a really nice option. It also is, a great place. We have this alley back here. So if, you had your little studio apartment in the ADU that was up above on the second floor, you could easily, drive up there and park, and you could have a fairly independent access to that ADU and not be needing to go through the main house. So that was, we all agreed that was a nice option to be adding to the housing typology. This one was a little bit about the green space and the gardening spaces being more integrated. And I think we have continued to look at that and really understand how these green spaces along the top really form a sequence of nice little circulation nodes as you move through the space. So we have this nice little linear pocket park here on the edge of our site that then connects over to the main community center over here, which then crosses over to these 3 little garden spaces that I think, we'll design with a really nice little meander through them. So, they'll function as a community garden space, but they'll also just be a lovely spot for people to walk through. And we have this 3rd node here on the other end, which again, just provides people with that nice space that they can go out and socialize in. We also were able to provide a 20-foot muse from 28th Street down into this community garden, which I think is going to be a really beautiful view corridor. It also offers a very strong pedestrian connection from 28th Street, as well as a nice buffer between these existing row homes that are to remain and these single family structures that are here. So this 20-foot muse really feels like it's providing, again, more green infrastructure and more ways to circulate through the site safely. We've also really refined and looked at what is going to hopefully be our dog park down here on our site. And so again, really providing that connectivity to the open green space, and then also allowing there to be some space around the dog park so that people would be able to go there. And even if you were just walking by, you could look at the dogs. You wouldn't have to initially go to the dog park, but that you could certainly see them. And then to be providing these little spaces at the end of each of the rows that can be designed as a rain garden, or a little spot where there may be a bench or something. So again, having these little nodes along the street where people could possibly stop and rest, or have an interesting little rain garden or some of these other amenities that we're imagining on the site. And then continuing to provide that connectivity to the greatest extent possible along Hugo at this signalized intersection, and then over to Clifton Park, or, coming down to Tivoli and then going down to the signalized intersection at the Alameda, and then going over to Clifton Park. And then, of course, there's opportunities to further work with the city on improving these connections, as, the city thinks about, how Tivoli and it might be better connected with Clifton Park. These are, there was a comment about the spaces between the houses and how usable was that space going to be. And I think it was a really good question, and something that we did think about quite a bit. And what we started to discover was that there is the facade of the house, and then we have these wonderful open air porches along the side. And it seemed like the open space on the lot wanted to be adjacent to the porch, so that, if you did want to be sitting on your front porch and have a cup of coffee, you could come out, possibly walk along your, in the side yard, and then back to, your backyard. So what we did was we shifted the facade of the building to be on the lot line, so that all of that open space is usable to that owner and is adjacent to the porch area. So we've used that as kind of a guiding principle in our actual overall layout. So every house has a detached and semi-detached. We have a similar way and thought about laying things out, where the building facade is on the lot line, and then the porch is actually abutting the open space, so that that space becomes a meaningful space for the homeowner to use in whatever way that they would like to. And then here is, there was quite a bit of conversation about Tivoli, and we had, kind of just gone cookie cutter down the Tivoli and put in the same unit type. And this speaks to, us going back and really studying it based on your all's comments about the ADUs. And that was then, an opportunity for us to break up that street frontage with a variety of houses. And you can see that we've also staggered the front of the houses. So, all of the buildings don't all just line up with each other. There's a little bit of variation even in how the houses, how much front yard there is for each of those properties. And then the other thing that it did give us an opportunity to do was to study the size of what, had just been a little alley here. And we were able to kind of readjust some of the lot lines and able to get a nice large, meaning I think this is about a 50-foot wide space, so that we have a really nice, meaningful open node in that area. And then I think the last one was maybe kind of similar to a previous comment, and that was more about the pedestrian experience and what does it mean to circulate from our neighborhood over to Clifton Park. And, we've really looked at this, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we have as a design team is that the limit of our development just goes to the edge of this alley here. And these areas along Tivoli and Fenwick and Hugo are essentially outside of our scope of work. And, I think the team does envision that hopefully at some point, this little one block connection between our development and Hartford Road will be further developed, to meet the complete street standards that we are using. So you get that wonderful, hopefully tree-lined street with a nice sidewalk and possibly on-street parking that will then, hopefully continue that, ease of circulation from our development over to Clifton Park. And then, any opportunities that there would be to work with the city as far as the sidewalks along Hartford Road, improving those, and then, possibly working with Rec and Park and see if there aren't ways to, really, because Clifton Park really turns its back on Hartford Road at this point. And, now that we have this beautiful new community in Tivoli, is there an opportunity to really, establish some nice little nodes on this edge of Clifton Park so that, the residents in Tivoli can really, clearly and easily access Clifton Park. So I think there's some really good opportunities. I think the team is really excited about how we can kind of build on the connectivity that we've established in our neighborhood to the surrounding neighborhood, and working on that. So I think all of these other slides are very similar to the slides that we had previously. So I might just go back to the first slide where we had the side-by-sides, and kind of just go over, give you a highlight of things that have evolved in the design. I would say one of the biggest things that has happened is that when we were further studying this space up here, we realized there was 2 homes that are scheduled to be demolished, as well as an alley. And when we looked at the configuration, we originally had the houses you can see facing Hugo, and which meant that we needed to build another alley on the backside. And so we said, well, what happens if we simply rotate those homes 90 degrees so that they face 28th Street and that they can use the alley that's already proposed back here? And when we did that, we were able to, add 3 4. We went from having 3 single-family homes to 4 single-family homes, as well as this 20-foot wide mews, so which provides that additional connection into our site. I would say another big, design move that we did make was, you can see here in the previous version that the community center, the parking was along this alley D, and we've been digging into the grading, and that alley is maybe like at a 5% slope, and it just wasn't making sense to have that much parking adjacent to the slope that was on that alley, versus this alley B has like a 2% slope. And so what we did was we can see what we did. We basically mirrored the parking and, this is the hub or the brain for the microgrid, and then the community center. So you can see that we did flip that. And I think that, I think it was pretty successful. Again, we're providing that really nice parking. I feel like it kind of nestles it into the overall design a little bit more. I mean, here it kind of feels like maybe it was sticking out like a sore thumb. And here you really kind of get that, again, I think it just integrates it more into the design. I think another nice move that we made was this dog park and open space along Tivoli. And again, you can see that we've placed it here. We've been able to provide direct connectivity from the community center park area over to the dog park. So I think that, again, speaks about how the nodes are being located along our circulation. The dog park is going to do double duty. We will have below grade stormwater management in that area. And we do have an existing storm drain as well as an existing sanitary that will run through there with an easement over it. But it seemed like it was a good use of a space that was going to have an easement. We really couldn't build any homes on it. We really needed it for stormwater management. And it seemed like a nice way to get it to do double duty for us. And then, of course, you can see we've got the ADU units that are now in these homes that abut Alley B. And I would say those were probably the biggest moves that we made. You can see that we've continued to evolve the design of the muses, and really we're starting to think about that connection of the pathways from the muse to the homes. And I know some of the other things that we are starting to think about are gateway markers, and how do we use those gateway markers kind of as wayfinding, right, as you move through the overall development. And I might just go quickly to those slides. I know we did update some of our precedent images. Again, this is our stormwater management plan. You can see where we started to understand where we need stormwater. And this is kind of it's called a linear modular wetland. It's basically an underground vault. But These are some of the green building. We are really we're really wanting to further understand how we can integrate rain gardens into our overall stormwater plan, as well as have some rainwater collection for specifically the community gardens. But if there's other ways to possibly have a purple pipe or a gray water pipe or purple pipe in the community center, we're definitely looking at those sorts of things as part of our overall design. Again, this is our open space network slide. And then this gives some more ideas about the precedent images for the muses. You can see, again, we're really starting to evolve that design of the muse, starting to understand how the hardscape material is really going to help differentiate the public from the private pathways to the homes. And then I think, again, we've updated a little bit our sections here to kind of help give a little bit more of a realistic feel. I think one of the biggest challenges for us from a landscape perspective is balancing the tree canopy with the solar canopies, because those two things don't necessarily want to be near each other. So most of our trees will be located along the streets and in the muses. And not so much like in people's backyards. And then again, some of our precedent slides about the look and the feel that we're looking for in our open spaces. These were some of the wayfinding ideas that we had, something that's sculptural that really speaks to, it being a very natural environment, not your typical, sign with a stone column. And then also just thinking about some of our site furnishing and features on the site, and how do we make it feel very natural and incorporated, and how does lighting really become an important part of our overall site design. And then here, I think we've looked at some of the precedent images for the architecture previously. And then these are, of course, our updated housing typologies and our lot layouts that we're looking to provide. And then we did do a couple of updated bird's eye views, as well as a couple of architectural elevations. I know it's probably not something we'll talk about today, but we have continued to study that and understand how those pieces are all starting, how is the vertical coming together with the horizontal. So I'm a little bit over, but so I'll stop talking, and happy to review the slide deck with the panel.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for a very thorough presentation. In fact, can you complete it and show us the new work at these street elevations? Forget about like colors, architectural materials, stuff like that. We're just trying to understand the massing still. So maybe, you don't have to go much further back. It's just, you had a few slides at the end that you flipped through very quickly. I'm curious about the aerial. If you can quickly locate us, because it was hard to read it in a 2 seconds.
Okay.
So just that one, and then the elevations, like whatever you've prepared for today. Again, it's not the architecture of the buildings per se, as I understand. This is more of a master plan, but just massing, right? And how they're working. Yeah.
So we can zoom in on that. This is just a different angle of it.
So if you go back, we are standing kind of on the side of the dog park. Just orient us, please, because you're more familiar with this than we are. The previous image, is that, were there two images?
Yes, there are two. So this is, I would say, kind of facing due north. So this is looking, north through the site. This is Tivoli Avenue. This is Hartford Road. Clifton Park is right here.
Okay, thank you. That's good. That's good, because that gives us the coordinates. And so we see the dog park on the left, the central park there, and then how the building, and so these gray along the alley behind Tivoli, those are the new units that were added there.
Mm-hmm. Those would be the ADUs. So
they're two-story. Mm-hmm. Is it a garage on the first floor?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that would be the, yep, exactly. Parking for, the main homeowner, and then, we're imagining it'll be like a studio level apartment. So, there would be access, probably from on the outside up to that unit that's on the top.
Okay. If you could zoom back out and maybe run your cursor through kind of the green network of the outdoor spaces. Like, let's say someone is taking a walk through the neighborhood in the
Sure,
summer
sure.
afternoon. Tell us how that would go.
Yeah, let's see. Let me see. Yeah, I think, this
Maybe
one
that
looks a
one,
little
yeah.
bit better.
So this
Yeah.
one, go to the next one, please. So that one, we're standing on the side of the dog park, right? The next
Yeah,
image.
so the dog park is right here. Yeah.
Can you go to the other aerial,
Oh, the
please?
other one. And then, yes, yep. So, yep, perfect. Yeah. So, yes, you're right. Yep. Dog park is here.
Uh-huh.
And then you can see, if there's connectivity across Tivoli, and that's the raised pedestrian crosswalk. And you would walk over, and you could go to the community center. Maybe you have, maybe there's someone with you that wants to go play on the play equipment, or there's also going to be some passive open space over there. So maybe you just want to go read a book,
And then
or
if
you
you
want to.
continue down that path by the center, then you're catching across the street and along the alley where the community gardens are in those
Yeah,
triangular
exactly.
spaces.
Yep. So you would be able to navigate through the gardens. You wouldn't have to go into the alley. There would be a path that would take you from one to the second to the third. And then you would cross. So this would be Fenwick. You would go through the three gardens, and then you could cross along Hugo. And we have this nice little node at the end on the other side of Hugo. So you could, really just walk through the whole community and be over on the other side. I think the other piece that you're starting to see here is this is that 20-foot wide mews that would connect to 28th Street, and it would bring you in to that community garden space that's right here, which would then connect you through this beautiful little, pedestrian mews that would then, bring you across Fenwick and then take you down to Tivoli. Depending on what you wanted to do, you could continue down Tivoli and then go back up the pedestrian mews here and work your way up through the neighborhood and back up to Hugo. So, I think, depending on the route that you wanted to take, there's a number of different spaces that you could end up in, or, going to visit your friend. Maybe it's
Yeah.
after school and you're going to
So
go have a play date.
yes, thank you. So the muses, are they fenced off? I think we asked it last time, or are they open?
So the muses are going to be, I did start to study that a little bit. And I think one of the things that I feel like is going to happen is that there's going to be a gate that will, I'm going to just go quickly to the elevations, is that where the houses I imagine that there's going to be a gate here. So you could walk up to the porch, but then the gate or the fence would start right here at the face of the porch. And that would kind of say, hey, you've either gotten to the porch and the stairs, and this is someone's private home, or you've gotten to this gate here. And it's anything behind the gate is private.
And so then is there a gate also where the muse meets the street?
We hadn't thought about that. Let me go back to this.
Yeah, the reason why I'm asking is because let's say you're walking on the sidewalk along Tivoli or one of the other streets that are, let's say, southwest moving, and it's hard because it's at an angle here. So I'm wondering, like you said, like you can take the muse and get across the neighborhood, but if I'm on the sidewalk there, is there a gate to the muse? Because the alley after that, the vehicular alley, obviously does not have a gate. So if I have a choice, would I go through a gate and through the muse, or would I just walk down the vehicular alley? I'm trying to understand if they're all open the way you're showing them in this image, or if there's
Kristen,
limited
yeah,
access.
we had not envisioned a gate separating the muse from that area, so we see them all as open.
Okay. So, if you're on the sidewalk, you can turn and you're on the muse and you don't have to go through a gate.
Absolutely.
And so from that point of view, then really the gates are between the houses so that they can protect that little side yard. And there will be some kind of a gate on the alley side that also defines that area. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yes.
Summarize? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. And now we can go to the next image, which is the elevations, the kind of the street views. And so how much space is there between the houses, between the porch and the next
It's
and the wall?
4 feet from the lot line to the face of the porch.
Mhm. And how much to the actual house, next house?
So from like face of building to face of building, I think those porches are probably 3 feet deep. So it's maybe going to be 7 feet from face of building to face of building.
Yeah. One thing, this is Mark. One thing that I do want to make sure we emphasize is that, the porches we're showing right now are more for illustrative purposes because we have not decided if we are going to do a wraparound porch or would we limit them just to front porch only. So that certainly would open up more space on the side if we don't do a wraparound feature. But at the same point in time, we have a number of design charrettes that'll be coming up to explore those options.
But in any case, you're looking at locating the building at the property line so you can maximize the amount of outdoor space on one side. Yeah.
On one side.
Okay. Understood. Are there any other slides that you've prepared that we didn't see before?
No, I think those were, I think those were the new ones that we had worked on.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through this. I think they're important. I think every master plan has a massing plan associated with it, and that's where you really start to see it three-dimensionally.
I think Davin had his hand up. I don't know if that was.
Oh, he must need to be elevated. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah.
Well, while that's happening, Caitlin, could you please elevate Davin? I think we may have questions for him as well. I started with some questions only because I wanted to make sure that this material gets reviewed as well. But I do want to open it up to Q&A for the rest of the panel. I heard Davin. Davin, very quickly, do you have any additional information to add to what we just discussed?
Yeah, just a small correction between the houses.
I didn't hear anything. Is it just me?
Yeah,
okay.
We lost you, Davin. Can you say that again? You may be having technical problems.
Yeah, we can hear you, Davin. We're gonna move on, but I hear that there's a correction, so the distance is something else. It's probably illustrated in the plan.
And I was gonna say maybe he can put it in the chat.
Yeah, you can just drop it there. Understood. We'll take that in consideration. I'd like to move over and see if the panel has any other questions. Sharon, what are your questions for the design team?
Your questions answered, prompted answers to many of them, Paulina, so thank you. The one remaining is, could you talk us through, and you were heading there, Paulina, but I wanted to know a little bit more. Could you talk us through how you see the muse in terms of public versus private, and also those end gardens on Tivoli, for example. So you have these green spaces, which are we can see that are larger than they were before, but they still seem to straddle the line between public and private spaces, circulation versus gathering. So can you talk us through the intention for the muse and for those end green spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see the muses as community gathering spaces for the neighborhood. It is essentially a shared front yard. I think we see people, coming out and having a glass of lemonade with their neighbor. Maybe someone's learning to ride their bike. It's a great place to do that. Or they're just walking, possibly with their dog or something. So I guess I've always envisioned the muses as being very communal, very much like a linear park, right? And that there's a lot of things that could happen there. You could sit, you could read a book, you could jog through there, maybe you're on your way to somewhere else. But it's also essentially an extension of the neighbors' front yards, and that you could sit on your front porch and kind of chat with your neighbor and anybody that's going by, right? I mean, I think that's a great Baltimore tradition, right? Is sitting on your front porch and saying hi to your neighbors. So I think that's kind of the way that we've envisioned for those muses to really be activated.
Hey, Kristen, I think also maybe it's worth adding. Hey, Sharon. I think it's probably also worth adding that we certainly see the muses and the park as a open community asset. It's not just for the homeowners who live there, but we do see that as the residents in Chum being able to come and utilize that asset. So whether it was an outdoor community festival there at the park, or whether someone was transitioning to get from Clifton Park, to our park, or vice versa, that these would all be open and available for them to use to do those transitions and or activities.
And then I think, Sharon, to your question about these little oak green spaces on the ends, I think we want to make sure that they are meaningful. I think right now we are reserving them for stormwater until we get our arms really around stormwater and how much underground treatment do we need to do? How much can we do that's at grade? So I think that's going to be that'll be the first, go at where do we need stormwater? And then it also may be areas where we make up a little bit of grade change because, we've got some flat areas on the site. So I think we're still exploring what happens in those spaces. But I think we do mean them to be, again, as Mark said, a community asset. We want them to be open and green and a nice, vibrant space for people or, creating some biodiversity on the site. So, we do need to continue to explore how those spaces are fully integrated into our overall plan.
Okay, thank you. That was my only set of questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. Kevin, what are your questions for the team?
Thanks. I guess, could you talk a bit about how have you all dove into studies in terms of the orientation of these panels and of all the panels that you're proposing? I guess I'm thinking specifically about the lower ones that even your renderings seem to be in shadow. I mean, is there, obviously there's optimal array, directional arrays for solar panels, and given that the plans have a triangle and it's sort of shifting, how are you planning to handle that in terms of making these things actually work?
Yeah. Hey, Kevin. We've done some preliminary studies. We have to go and do a full bore shading analysis for all of the site, but certainly because we have a number of flat roofs, we'll take advantage of the height of those. Certainly where we have southern orientations, we'll maximize those. Like every large community solar project, we are going to have some areas that are less effective than others, but that's the reason why you have a microgrid, right? To be able to share and load share where you need to. And some area that may be less productive in the morning might be more productive in the evening. But we'll have a deeper dive on that in the coming months. But we also are aware that some properties, if it is that it's just unusable for solar, then we would count it that way as unusable. We don't see more than 5% of the property being in that category, but there will be some areas that may be less worth the squeeze, as they say, for that to happen.
Just to add, the houses are intentionally asymmetrical in the roof line, so that the larger areas can be used for solar panels that are oriented towards the sun, and they are typically either towards the southwest or kind of the west orientation.
Yep. Thanks, David.
And then my other question is, so I just want to make sure I saw in the chat, Devin, that you put that face to face is 10 to 12 feet, which means that if I'm understanding this correctly, that means when there's a porch, if, you know, a usable porch needs to be 6 to 8 feet. So that means that the actual space between the porch and the house is 2 to 4 feet. Is that correct?
So the porch is about 6 feet. So between the porch and the face of the next house is about 5 feet.
And all of the questions were answered with Paulina and Sharon, so thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Osborne, what are your questions for the team?
Hi, just two simple questions. And I may have missed it, but if I have a visitor coming in to spend some time with me, is there parking accommodations for that?
Yeah, good question. And that was when we did, so we have on-street parking, and we have been, to the greatest extent possible, you know, we did a quick, we ran the numbers quickly, and we have about 100 on-street parking spaces, and we have about 100 units in our project. So, we imagine it would, you can't count on-street parking, but that would be how we would imagine it would work, is that those on-street parking spaces would serve if someone came to visit. So.
Okay. And then as a follow-up to that, bike accommodations, bike routes, are you encouraging pulling bike routes into the community? Any accommodations for bike storage as well, or is that just left up to each resident?
Yeah, I can speak briefly to that. In terms of bike storage, we do envision that in the rear, probably in either within those carport areas, places where someone can do elevated storage if they, want to pull their bike up. Certainly inside, they would be able to do that if they wanted to put in that connection. We are going to be, when we get deeper into design, taking a look at whether or not we can have a more intentional design, either rack or mounting space within the unit for those that want to mount inside. That'll be up to the individual. As far as a bike lane, I think we're going to need to do a meeting. We were taking a look to see if whether or not along Tivoli might there be an opportunity to add that to give, as I like to say, a more of a park-to-park direct access point. But that's one of those things that'll be up and coming in the next couple of months. We would love to do it if we can find a good space to make that happen.
Thank you.
And
Those are my
we
comments.
can certainly have sharrows, we can always mark it as, but I think to Mark's point, it would be great to have a real dedicated.
And I think we will be looking at, certainly bike share at the community center. And so that's why I'm thinking Tivoli would probably be our best opportunity.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Osborne. I think I answered mine. You guys answered mine with respect to just the circulation through this, and it was very clear. I appreciate showing the specific changes per page and then going back and in the side-by-side summarizing it. It really helps track things and see the differences between the previous scheme and this scheme. So thank you for this. It's very, very helpful. Before we get into the comments, I wonder if we can get to a different view here. Just take a second and see if you can get your thumbnails of the pages to show on the left and the actual image on the right, because it will be the best way to find a page.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to go back to it. Continuous. Oh, that's not good.
Okay. Well, let's just keep it one
Keep going.
page.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't see a button for thumbnails. Okay.
Yeah, I just need to get out of this mode, but okay.
Okay. Is there something for show thumbnails? I don't see it.
I use it all the time. I just don't know.
All right. So we'll stick to this. Let's get to the overall site plan, please, the current one.
Okay, here we go. I think this is
Oh,
what
there
we're
it is.
looking for. Okay, yeah.
All right. Made it. Thank you. Thank you for this. Okay, so this will work. Let's scroll up on the left side and find the site plan. I think that'll be a good place to start. And I'd like to go back around to Sharon and see what her comments are for the project.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to focus on the public-private space issue because to me that still seems to be your biggest challenge, based on what you're telling us. You know what your intention is, what your desire is for the goal of this community. I see the progress from last time, whereas last time it was just a path between the front doors of the houses and very small front yards. Very definitely a private resident sort of space. And now you've opened it up. You've created serpentine passes, pathways, and there is definitely more of a muse feel to it. However, I don't see it having the dimension that your precedents do, for example, where it looks like a park, where there is truly a park moving through the community, a linear park. That would feel public enough for people to feel comfortable to come in and spend time, read the book, and all the things that you want to have happen here. So again, I'm speaking to your desires for this design. It still seems like it will be, because of the proximity of the houses, the fronts of the houses to each other, the dimension of that muse. It's still difficult to see that feeling like a pause place. You have to make a decision between what is circulation, what is pausing, what is gathering, what is park, what invites the public to stay there. And right now, the scale of those spaces still feels very much like a circulation route. A very attractive, pleasant circulation route, big improvement, I think, over the last one that I think does invite the public to move through there and across the community. So I think you've accomplished that goal. But what I don't think is there yet is the sense of a public park. And that's what a muse is. It's a public space. It's that third place that we talk about, right? Where it invites people outside, especially when we have small houses. It invites community and all the things that you talked about. So I still think that there's a scale issue there, that muddies the water between public-private space and truly makes those spaces feel like public space. So I think there's work to do there. Again, I think a big step forward, still much more inviting for movement through the space, but still not yet satisfying what you have stated as a goal. I think it's a step forward in terms of systems thinking and networks thinking, which you're creating a whole new community. You got this great blank slate, and the ability to create a system of open spaces, a system of circulation networks, and a system of stormwater management. And I think as you refine this, that's going to have to be the mantra, is systems and networks. And I hear that vocabulary when you're talking about the energy grid. And I think we need to see stronger overlays as you refine the plan in that open space system, circulation system, stormwater. Stormwater doesn't have to be individual BMPs and vaults. What is the stormwater system? How are we creating this water resource system? And again, plugs in very well to your narrative as this beautiful eco-village, systems-oriented, environmentally oriented new community. And stormwater has to be part of that, and it's systematically. We'd like to see, it's not too early, obviously, to be thinking, because it has to be baked in, as you know, just like the energy systems. So seeing those physical, ecological systems start to emerge very clearly as a planned, intentional community in that way. I see the movement toward that with the public, the little farms, the small community gardens. Small note, be careful of sun orientation. It looks like maybe southern sun might not be able to make its way there. So sun, sunshade studies will have to get done, early days for all that. But just thinking along those lines too, in terms of their placement. Again, not too early to be thinking about how these spaces are laying out for the purpose that you've stated. And then similarly, the Muse, the 20th Street Muse, again, great connectivity, big step forward, but what do people do there? Do they stop or do they move through it? That is always the question. What are we doing there? Is it a circulation space? Is it a park? And if it's a park, how do you program it? Is it big enough for that? So just seeing that intentionality in the scales of the spaces. I'm sure my architecture colleagues will comment on this, but it does seem like the spaces between the porch and the next building is extremely narrow. It's a path. It's a way to move through to the backyard, but it's not a garden. I do like the idea of that transition from indoor to semi-indoor on the porch to outside. It's a lovely thought, and I love the idea of there being that transition set of transition spaces where you're fully outdoors and then you're partially indoors and then you're indoors. But I think there's still some spatial challenges there to work out in order to be successful with that. And then finally, love the idea that you're going toward with the Clifton Park partnerships. And I think even though it's physically off your site, it'll definitely benefit the community to engage with those partnerships and start to strengthen those connections and programmatically and physically to start creating a strong connection to this fabulous asset that you have right next door. So partnerships are a way to do that, as you're already talking about. So I would encourage that to continue because I think that could be very important to this community. And that's all I have. Thanks, Paulina.
Thank you, Sharon. Kevin, what are your comments for the team?
Thanks. I really appreciate Sharon's thoughts about this public to private in the open space, and I share all those same concerns. Maybe I'll jump into a slightly different angle where, first I want to say, I do think this does represent a real improvement. And I think, for example, the small rotation on 28th Street makes a lot of sense. It's a good move. The ADUs are great. I think the idea of this dog park breaking up that extra long block that you had seems really smart. And, and then the porches, the porches are amazing. They're so underutilized in so much of our housing nowadays. And they're just they're the most, this integrate in between public and private, this place where public life happens, where socialization, people talk to their neighbors. It's fantastic. So all those things are just that's why I think your project has some very super clear, very simple, strong ideas. But there's a couple for being an eco village. For me, it's a little light on the technical assessment of what you're actually doing. There's these websites like Project Sunroof where you can just map a spot and it tells you the solar capacity based on trees and I think just a fundamental just a basic level of that kind of study of the capacity I think would really add some richness to your plan, because I think you're going to find out, your own 3D model shows it, that those low parking garages on the north side of a 2-story house are not going to generate solar, right? So then the question becomes, well, why have them? And because if they're a pervious surface that's not generating energy, and maybe there's something lovely about sort of flexibility on the alleys where you could maybe have things like pervious surfaces that people can park or not park if they only bike, for example. Maybe not everyone owns a car. Maybe kids can put up a basketball hoop or a trampoline, or maybe people could do a more substantial personal garden. And so the idea of flex space in the back, you've kind of erased that possibility with this kind of a fetishization of covering and comfort for these massive carbon, intensive fuel guzzling vehicles, which is kind of like the opposite of like a message of an eco village. Like, in some ways, it seems like the promotion of like Osborne's point about how you're accommodating bikes and multimodal transportation, and maybe the carport's like an optional thing, and it's only if you have a car, only if you really want to like make your car shaded, not care so much about people being shaded. That would be, so I think that kind of like, that could be tied into like a very clear analysis, like a cost benefit. Are you generating solar? If not, what are the other options? And I would say even if you are generating solar, I still think it's a valid question to just sort of say like, maybe there's a room for more pervious surfaces that can be flexible and that can account for like, gardens and play and shade and trees. I mean, I think that the idea of saying that there's going to be no trees in the backyard because of the carports is a little, it's a little harsh. And I think also, if you look at your 3D, I really love this, your 3D aerials. I mean, they kind of show, if you look at the neighborhoods around you, look how big those trees are. Like the trees you're showing are like these anemic little, like they're 12 feet tall. You're going to have trees you want trees everywhere, right? Like look at, go to the other aerial, you'll see just how lush, the trees in the neighboring boulevard are. Like they're going to be overhanging and doing a lot. And I think you want that, right? That's like part of being in like this, it's anyways. So I think that's my point about the whole solar thing. I think the proximity of the houses too, to me, it's really puzzling because like 5 feet, it's just so close. And at that point, either you're committing to the property line wall having like few or no windows for privacy issues, or if they do have windows, there's very little privacy because people are literally 5 feet away looking right in your living room. And if you don't have windows, then you're on the porch, your experience is of a blank wall 5 feet away from you. So it's really, again, like Sharon said, it's kind of a passage. And, the row house typology where you have shared walls, it's to do, as it's shown with individual homes, it's a minimum of 25% more building materials. And it's also a minimum of 25% fewer units, right? So it's sort of like, those are both not eco approaches. Those are kind of suburban approaches. And so I don't know, I just think like just tightening in on the metrics and the benchmarking and like the actual, the kind of light science behind sort of planning for, sustainability and a carbon neutral future. Like, I don't know, my fear is that you build this whole thing and you find out that the neighborhood one over, like with the 1910s row houses, is actually like, 5 times more energy efficient because they have fewer walls exposed and energy. There's much more energy efficiency. There's more people per acre, utilizing fewer like lengths of infrastructure. So I just think like one more round of tightening up like the technical analysis on this is just going to go a long way, because I think the plan is strong, like the block network, like the open space network, it all looks super intriguing and exciting and all that. So I would just recommend maybe thinking about that. Oh yeah, one last final very tangible suggestion, like your diagram showing the connections to Clifton. I think maybe you can even suggest working with the city to just get crosswalks at the ends of your streets, right? Just a very simple, like ease of crossing a path, because I think your diagram showed how you have to kind of turn right, left, and everything. That might be another way to actually make a physical connection to the park. But those are all my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Osborne, what are your comments for the team?
Hi. So I'm actually in between two minds on this project, but I'm leaning more towards, I think it's a valiant attempt. On a personal side, it could potentially be risky, and you kind of heard a little bit of that from Kevin. But on the other hand, you could be tapping into something that potentially can begin to address a critical need, not just here in Baltimore, but across many parts of the country. But as you know, there's always going to be the challenge of, well, this is not necessarily a set of typologies that's everyday to our lifestyle. You go to other parts of the world, South America, Asia, etc., and this is more common. So that's the risky part of it. Is it going to be received? But the fact that you've stepped out and you've clearly taken a step to do this, it shows that it's bold. It shows that you trust the community, you trust the economics of this, and the only step you need to take now, as far as I'm concerned, is figure out how best to make it work. Best make it work as a community. And one of the reasons I asked about the parking was because as I kind of look at the street layouts, it's very clear to me you go through the main street arteries, and then the only way to get from one street to another is either through the alleys or as a pedestrian circulating through the Muse. And that's fine. But that sort of really sets up a hierarchy in terms of how the areas you want to accentuate, the areas you want to kind of dumb down a little bit, and where do you want to focus most of the pedestrian activity and the communal type spaces. This is a hybrid of a communal type community in terms of how it's arranged. And I think somehow the circulation has to reflect that as well. And I'm going to also tap into some of the comments that Sharon made regarding the Muse. I think the Muse is a wonderful idea, but it's kind of 6 in one, half a dozen in the other, right? It's here and there, right? And you either need to go all the way out or you need to back off of it. Again, and I think what's challenging you, what's creating the challenge for you is that dimension. And as I think Sharon also pointed out, the precedent that's shown is very gracious in terms of a Muse and having, it reads more as a more public communal type space that, oh, by the way, you can circulate through it. Whereas what you've got here is it's kind of not that, right? The only thing I could think of that it reminds me of somewhat is if you went to the beach, if you're in a beach town, right? And the blocks that are closest to the water, right up on the boardwalk or right on the beachfront, the units are very small for whatever reason, right? And there are these little alleyways, these little sort of circulation paths that connect you back to the beachfront. Again, and this is beginning to feel like that, the Muse, right? Except that you've made them a little bit wider, but you're not getting enough out of them, right? So one thing I would probably suggest is maybe you have to kind of use the units or elements of the units to kind of begin to articulate the more private pieces. Whether you introduce something like maybe a screen, a yard screen of some sorts, not a fence, right? But yard screens that are kind of coupled together or work in such a way that they begin to clearly define the private realm from the circulation path. Another thing you can do is maybe one or two of those units are slightly different. So the configuration of, let's say, the central units are a little bit smaller, so you give back a little bit more to the public realm. And instead of trying to take that kind of public-private balance all the way through the length of the Muse, maybe it starts off at the sidewalks at the street level as more of a narrower circulation path. And then when you get to the center of that block, it opens up into something that's more communal, right? That's another way to do it. It's traditional, but again, it begins to better define how I think that space needs to work. So I think that's one thing you can work on. I will say, though, that the intent is there. I do like how you're beginning to accentuate the crosswalks through the main streets, Tivoli, etc., by introducing those bump outs. Those are certainly nice touches. If there's an opportunity to even make them larger, I would welcome that, mainly because not only are they bump outs, it shortens your cross time across the street, but it also creates an opportunity where you can get a bench in, some seating, some more trees, some more greenery. It's another outdoor space that the community can use and gravitate to. I think you're a little deficient from my taste on parking, mainly because if you have so many folks in here, you're going to have quite a number of visitors coming. And, this portion of Baltimore, yes, there are buses that move around, but most folks also need a car to get around. So if there's an opportunity to even create a little bit more of a centralized parking lot, nothing big, but just so that at least they have options. I think that will help. The community areas, I don't know how much you can do with that, mainly because of where it's located. I think you went through and you kind of indicated that you can't centralize it more because there are grade challenges and all that. But at the same time, the way the circulation paths work, I shouldn't need signage to know where the central community areas are. And I'm not sure if I'm closer to Harford Road in any of those units. If I don't know this community very well, I probably wouldn't know where it is. So if there are other cues that you can begin to introduce in terms of the landscape and so forth that can potentially guide you to that centralized area, I think that would help as well. And then my final comment is, it seems as though with all of the units along Tivoli, you've gone back and you've kind of modified that a little bit in terms of where you've located the unit on the lot, and potentially how you've modulated the change in unit types. I would like to see that also in the actual architecture, materiality, what exactly these things look like. Otherwise, you've not necessarily changed the relentlessness of that sort of typology continuing along Tivoli. So in terms of how you organized materials, I think that's something you can begin to address that will help to modulate that sort of a sameness for all of those units along Tivoli. Other than that, I think it's a wonderful challenge. You don't always have to build what everyone else is building. You don't always have to look the way everyone else looks. And I think there's a kind of freshness that's beginning to encroach into your project, which I think is welcoming. Those are my comments, Paulina.
Thank you, Osborne. I'll add a few more things. It's great to see comments looked at from different perspectives. I think you'll see naturally a lot of overlaps of the specific things we're all looking at, but perhaps through a slightly different lens and angle. So some of mine will overlap something that you've already heard, but I sort of came at it from a different position. So if we can go back to the slides that looked at our comments and your response to them, I'd like to comment on each one of those, if possible.
So this was just the overview. So this was comment number 1.
So this was regarding the outdoor space, right? I think I was a little disappointed to see that there wasn't an actual study done of the scheme that you had with its particular vehicular circulation. I think what we're seeing on the right are some of the schemes you studied before. You showed us a lot of your studies and how you've arrived here. This project has already gone through several iterations. And I think we all agreed last time that the specific street network was the most efficient. I think you started back in the day with just let's wipe it all out and reconfigure the entire grid, and it's very costly. And I think everyone here would agree, if you have a way of doing at least the public infrastructure a bit more efficiently and even reuse specific places, you should. So I think what we asked for is to take the current plan you have and just sketch very quickly some of the what ifs. It's not about tossing everything away. It's not about how can we introduce more infrastructure to this. It was simply a question of, and it, as it stays currently, and I think even the way you presented it, it appears that the houses came first. There's an efficiency study here done as to how can we lay out, a certain yield and a certain typology most efficiently. And naturally, some of these triangular spaces that are left along that north portion of the site become outdoor spaces. So let's make those the community spaces. So it's very clear in this plan is that that's how those things ended up where they are. And I think everyone here would appreciate efficiency. Obviously, we want things to be meaningful, to be elegantly laid out so that, things work. But I think there's a couple of iterations of your current scheme that can have that outdoor space without changing your primary grid of infrastructure that positions it more centrally. And it was just a matter of how can we do that and keep the yield that we have. And only when you sketch that out, and it could have been a simple hand sketch like the one on the bottom right, but without tossing again all the grid aside, is when you can actually evaluate it and say, hey, am I gaining anything specific from doing that or not? I think in each scenario that I can at least envision right now, just looking at it, there would be things to gain, especially when it comes to that idea of the connectivity and that idea of the project having a heart and a soul, but also so that some of that clarity about public and private is maintained. And maybe some other things may not be advantageous. Maybe you will take like some kind of a hit. Maybe you'll lose 2 units. So you can say, yeah, but we're losing 2 units, so let's not. I feel like that is the kind of due diligence you owe your last scheme, the one you're about to move into a PUD, the one you're going to put into a master plan and you're going to tie yourself to, and that it will be really hard to change later. I think you owe it to yourselves as a team to just take the latest and greatest and give it one more what if, okay? And not by virtue of tossing things aside, not by virtue of removing everything, let's see what happens. No, it's about taking some of the key pieces and seeing if there is indeed a better place for them. And I think one of them remains that open space. And I'll tell you why. I think when I looked at this, and I think first of all, I should say there's a lot of really quality thought put in here. I can tell the team is working together cohesively and really working through and thinking through all of these. So I'm not discounting absolutely anything that's been done so far, even the progress that's been made between the two meetings. What I'm talking about here is just the observation as an outside eye, right, into this. And right now, if we never talked about Eco Village when you guys first came, or if that's not at all anywhere as part of this commentary, it's very easy for me to see that this is a plan of semi-detached and detached, single-family homes for this that is laid out in a very efficient way that will be a welcome addition to this community. It's been cooking for so many years and it's so needed, and it can be really, really important. But is it an eco village? Or is it just, a new housing sort of community where the leftover space was turned into community space, like along the alleys and kind of in the triangular spaces? So I think it's worth asking that question. If this isn't just a marketing sort of ploy, what makes, and I'm not saying that it is, I'm saying this is how you would draw the line when you start really figuring out, to the comments that you've heard already, am I going all the way? Is this really an eco village? Start to think about, if this wasn't just the housing, what would make it that? Is it the photovoltaics? Is it like the grid system? Is it all of that, all of the technology, all of the systems? And if that's the case, to the previous comments, go all the way. Approach it from the point of view of like, this isn't just a housing development. This is a whole new way of laying out these systems and make it clear and make it sort of embedded into the project. Similarly, and not to any less of a degree, because that's the most visible thing you're going to see, is the open space and the green space that you're creating and where it's locating and how it's utilized. I made a point in our previous presentation when you guys were showing certain examples. We don't see them as part of this presentation as much anymore. When I looked at those examples, I could tell that's an eco village. And you know why? Because the green space, the food production, that, everything was integrated, right? It was part of the daily life of people. It wasn't like, here's the houses, and then over there where they don't fit enough the property line is all of the green features. And I think that's also a fundamental difference between, and maybe it's up to you to establish what about this is an eco village. And then if you make those lines, and it's not just about, I'm not talking about kind of from the kind of real estate kind of salesmanship part of it again, but like from the actual planning perspective, what makes this an eco village? To what degree is the natural environment and the access to the natural elements part of this? And is it just wherever we're left off with the triangular spaces, or is it because that's the heart and the soul and the most important part of this community? I think they may sound like very high level kind of concepts and ideas for you guys to kind of really clearly lay out, but I think it's something that you can use as your own framework to really determine to what degree certain things are important to this plan. And from there, to what degree can you really celebrate them? Because in the end, you want this to be an eco-village because it is important, because you've put a lot of effort into it. You don't want it to look like just the regular. The photovoltaics alone on every roof aren't going to do it. There's got to be. I mean, it's true. It's going to be one of the most visible things, right? So here's these houses with the photovoltaics, right? It has to be the rest of it, and it has to be cohesive, and it has to be thought of as one complete system. So I think that it's a missed opportunity if you don't consider it one more time and see how that park can be better connected to these muses. I think it's part of the issue that you're hearing is that they continue to feel very disconnected and very ambiguous from the point of view of like, do you want people there or do you not want people there, right? And mostly because you're also constrained on size. Of course, that in that example that you showed us, that muse is twice as wide as the one that you have. And of course that if you had the space, you would probably prefer it that it's a linear park and not as narrow as you have it. But at that point, maybe you ask yourself the question, could this be just, green entries to the unit? It's like if it's not really truly a muse and people can't really walk through it, don't feel comfortable walking through it because it feels very private, then, can we just make it semi-private like that and, distribute provide other ways of moving through the neighborhood that are actually more comfortable? I think it's important to just delineate and define things and really go all the way, whether it's systems, whether it's a specific design element, and make sure that all of these things really work the way you want them to. Mike, so maybe we can go to the next image. I think it was for the muse, right? So I can transition to that next slide. Was it the muse?
So this
These are the units. Yeah, those were the units. Let's go to the muse. I think the third one of the other comments were those. So these are the typology of the spaces. I think there's a big, maybe we can pause here for a minute. There's a big improvement from last time. This is the first time we're starting to see them as a continuous system and node. And it's okay if some of the spaces are the leftover spaces that we're trying to make useful and all of that. And, we can define them typologically. What is like a rain garden that still has a really, great quality as part of kind of this continuous urban edge, and some of it becomes a community garden. So some of those things could be these residual edges around things, but some of the other things need to be more intentional and more meaningful because you got to have enough things that hold the plan together so that it's not like all a bunch of stuff happening because that's sort of where it happened. And it's okay if there's like anomalies within that, or we're sort of stringing them together with these pathways, but the rest of the pieces need to be talking to each other. And right now there's like the two muses and the park that kind of are emptying out on Tivoli and then on that other street, but don't quite really communicate as part of the same type of space. And that's why I was asking if I'm walking down the sidewalk, do I just take a hard left into that muse? Would that feel like the right way to do it? I'm wondering if that feels a little bit too compressed and too private there because we still don't have the width that you're showing in your precedent. Would people actually take the alley to cut across? And that's when you know that the good intentions have failed. That's what I'm trying to avoid here, is that if you don't do that muse thing right, you may not get people to walk through there and talk to their neighbors, because it doesn't feel public enough, and maybe it's not private enough so that people don't really use it in other ways. So it's really important to get that right, because then the alley becomes then your primary way of circulating through the neighborhood, because it feels as if like I can just, take the left and not have to bump into people's front doors if I don't need to. So we're really talking about just moving through the neighborhood. Can we go to the next page? I think maybe I have them out of order. This is for the units. Yeah, I think it's been said before, and we see it in the elevations and in the massing, how close the buildings are to each other. And then once you start to introduce a wraparound porch that is in that narrow space and then facing a two-story blank, for the most part, wall, I question if that's really the best use of space. I'm looking at the ones with the wraparound porches. And I still think that maybe them as duplex will make more sense if that maximizes the use of outdoor space on each side. I think, and to your point, I'm glad that there's going to be more deeper dives into these and you're going to hear feedback from people, but I really think these need to evolve a little bit more. The concern from last time was that just because we pour everything in green, doesn't mean that it will be. My issue is that 5-foot alley on the side that has buildings on each side won't grow grass. Trust me, it won't. It just doesn't. If it doesn't see daylight, I mean, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but if there is no direct sunlight, grass will not grow there, so it will not be green. Maybe some very, very shade-loving plants and whatnot, but I think if you bake it into the master plan and then later you go, oh man, what plants am I going to put there that are going to survive? Then you're not going to have it green. It is going to get mulched or graveled over or paved over. And so I think we want to get real about the true intention of things and how they're actually going to function. Okay, one more, next please. So I think the dimensions between the houses, the use of that green space remains in question. I think moving one edge to the property line is absolutely valid, but then I think the issue of what's left and how it's used is also still on the table. And I think the only slide I missed is the bringing the variation of the units, or maybe this is the variation of the units. I think this is a very solid approach. I think definitely improved tremendously along Tivoli, and it speaks kind of to the quality of the rest of the neighborhood. I think that's a no-brainer. It's a really good modification here. I'm questioning the dog park, both, it's connected to the main park, but I also saw it's used for stormwater management. My understanding from other projects is the two don't quite go well together because one requires a surface and it has a polluting quality, the other one doesn't, but I leave it up to the experts to really figure that out. But I wonder if there's also another place for the dog park. It's sort of very nestled among the houses there. But I, in general, welcome that break in the stick of houses, which I think helps bring the scale back to what some of the other block making techniques you're using for the neighborhood. So that brings some nice consistency. I'm still trying to make it to the slide with the muses. You can please keep going. This is that network. So, and the crossing across and how you connect to all of these different places, you are limited just to your property. However, the fact that all of the kind of communal and gathering places are actually all the way to the north edge of the property makes that connection a little bit tougher, because at one point your development just stops and the other one begins, and then we get to Hartford. So there's really no real connection that can be established to the park. It's actually a disconnect. There's the line, there's those houses, they're back, yards and cars, and then the heart of the neighborhood is somewhere to the north. So I think to the degree of that connectivity and that continuous network, something would need to happen closer to these nodes before you leave your neighborhood, so that it actually starts to feel like more connected to Clifton Park, more intentional, as in like we are part of Clifton, we are part of Hartford Road, as opposed to like, no, we're something like tucked in and it's a couple of blocks up the street. I think that could be very helpful. And we talked about it last time. So if I turn left onto Tivoli, what am I going to see first? I'm going to see kind of the back of the houses, and somewhere along the curve at one point, once I arrive there, I can look to the right and see the park. I think it's that location of that really tremendous amenity and kind of an iconic element, which could be an iconic element, a celebration of this whole community, is sort of very detached. It's sort of shoved in that leftover space that I think you can improve on. And then the next one, please.
So then I think those were the 6 comments.
Okay, so then maybe the muses were somewhere else after that. I remember you had images. So I want to look at the one that has your section and that has that aerial of the president there.
Right. So here we go.
There you go. Let's start here. Yeah, this is perfect. All right. So number one, that the space on the right is double the amount of space you have on the left, right? So the right side is the intention. It's what you guys wanted to work with. You want it to feel like a park, and you want it to have that quality of like, yes, people can just walk through it and meander and get to the other side of the neighborhood, and then, there's sufficient space where people could come out and do things, right? This was your description, is the image on the right, but the reality is the image on the left. And it's fundamentally different because, there's nothing announcing sort of at the entry that this is indeed part of the common path, part of the neighborhood. I wonder if it's purely geometric and how the sidewalks and kind of the connection between muse and sidewalk really works so that it appears to be flowing in and out of itself so that they are part of that same system. Do you know what you mean? Like they feel disconnected. There's sidewalk and then there's this muse at a hard 90 degree, and there really isn't anything that connects them visually or programmatically. And this blown up image even demonstrates that too. So which one is it? Like I would be totally okay if this is a semi-private space because I've seen those, like Butcher's Hill has them, and it has like a very small little gate, right? And it's about the same size, and it's a really wonderful front door for these houses, right? But it's not a circulation path and it's not a park, right? And in this particular case, at most, the muse as you've drawn it on the left will be a circulation path. And that's only if people feel comfortable getting so close to, people's front doors. But it doesn't substitute the being able to just walk through the neighborhood, right? And that's why I'm afraid that these alley streets start to feel a little bit more comfortable. And maybe it's okay for people to meander through the alleys too. If they're designed as nice spaces, they will be there. So I think people might use them. So what you've heard from Sharon and then from everybody else after that is like, which one is it? You have to pick. Is it going to be a park and a main thoroughfare for the neighborhood? And maybe there's not two of them, maybe two are private and then one is more public. But there needs to be a very clear and honest differentiation because what we want it to be is the right side and what it is the left side, and they're not the same thing. So I think I have no preference one way or the other, as long as it functions well and as long as that works. Like for example, in the plan on the left, it seems like a place to get to people's front doors, right? There's something about it to where every time it meanders, it sort of hits somebody's front door. So right now it's designed for me to get from the street to the front door or if somebody's coming and visiting us, right? Where are those activities going to happen? So if it's the public and they want to come into the muse and read a book, as you were saying, where would that happen? Maybe it doesn't happen mid-block. Maybe it only happens in that area where the sidewalk and the muse transition, right? So even that alone will make a big difference because one, it's inviting people to kind of transition between what they would recognize as a sidewalk into the semi-public space, but there's something, a type of a programmed surface or space where that can happen. And then there's these legible kind of things and maybe they don't need to go between house 3 and 4 to go read a book, right? But maybe if they hang in that zone, that's, before you get into the houses, then it's still working as a muse and maybe it can just get you to the other side. So I think there's a little bit of a deeper, more intentional thought that needs to be put in here so that it actually delivers on the really great things that you want it to do. I think part of it also is still the width, part of it is still the location. If that Central Park was to move indeed a little bit more central, I think the muses can start to connect to it. And that gives them automatically a far more public quality, as opposed to them just being, the pathway in front of houses off of the sidewalk. I think it's really important to differentiate that. I think you should continue to look at precedents. It's less important that you find something that matches the winding path of what you've drawn to the left. I think it's actually more important to find things that address specifically the conditions that you do have. Because I think that's when you really are going to have the precedents help you. Because they're the ones that are saying, okay, you only have this much space. So this is what you can do with that. And I think start with what you have and really try to find the things that are helpful. And again, maybe a portion of it is not public it sort of is honest to what it is and how much space you have. And that would be okay, as long as it's clear. I think my last comments are related to the three-dimensional studies, the studies at the back, the massing. Yes, I think the elevation ones particularly gave me pause. And I think Kevin touched on that a little bit. I don't quite understand, unless there's a very specific marketing component to having these buildings as detached single-family homes. I really think that just keeping them a few feet away from each other is really hurting both the quality of the spaces on each side, but also even to a degree the quality of the street front, and they just feel just very crammed. And maybe because we are in Baltimore and because we are so used to buildings being joined together rather than just 5 feet apart in between, I question whether their buildings need to be so detached if you don't have the space to actually create meaningful side yards. And I, for one, am in favor of perhaps putting a few together if it means giving people more usable space or even just more light and air that moves between the houses. And I think there's a little bit of a study within your typology that can be done, especially in the areas that are really tight. If there's an opportunity to combine or join 2 or 3 together just to give a little bit more usable outdoor space. Again, eco-village, right? The addition of the natural element to the living, to the everyday lives of people. And it does start with their house. I think the porches are a fabulous addition. Front porch, wraparound porch. I would recommend using actually that as a planning device. So for example, some houses get front porches so that others can get wraparound ones, and you can maintain the privacy on one side, right? For one of the residents, and the other ones get their porch kind of facing forward. I think there's a really good combination that can happen there, but that's about it. There's no other outdoor space or natural component that's added here. Is there an opportunity for some of them to have a side yard or even some backyard, as others have said before, so that they can use them for anything other than parking a car? So those are the kind of things that I think are still lacking a little bit in this, from the point of view of like, what about this proposal makes it an eco-village outside of kind of the marketing and the big branding idea of it. And it does go down all the way to the units, all the way to the systems, all the way to how these outdoor spaces are actually going to function. I hope that you'll have time. I know you're moving forward, and I know you want to, complete the master plan so that you can actually go in detail and hammer all of these things out. But I hope you have time to take one last kind of hard look and really align your goals and the master plan to each other by vetting each one of these components one last time against kind of the reality to which they've been developed at this point. Let's see, we started about 10 minutes late. We are about out of time. I want to see if our panel has any additional comments to add here.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, panelists. Thank you again to the project team. Super exciting. It's great to see it continue to evolve and develop. I believe this will continue to evolve. As you're going through stages, we really look forward to seeing it do that. And I'm going to pass it over to the planning department if they have any additional comments and any parting thoughts.
Thank you, Pavlina. No additional comments at this time. I've been taking notes, and I will try to provide you those notes by tomorrow, and I'll be in touch to discuss next steps. Well, thank you, guys.
And I'll send you the PDF of the final version, Antoine.
Thank you.
Have that for your records.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for your thoughtful comments, and we look forward to continuing to work with everybody on the project.
Thank you all. Thank you for the good work.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. We'll certainly continue to take a look at all of these thoughts. It is a challenge to squeeze a lot of things into what is effectively a 2-block radius to be able to have the space we would all love to enjoy. But you all have given us some additional things to think about, and we'll certainly take the time to do it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys. We'll move on to the next project, which is the Sanaa Center. This will be the second UDAAP presentation for the Sanaa Center complex. believe we have the applicants here with us. Is there anybody that you guys need elevated that isn't elevated? I've elevated Chris, Lola Day, Lady Byron, as well as Jimmy and Todd as well, I believe.
That should be everyone, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Pavlina to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Antoine. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to UDAAP. I am connecting remotely today, so I will keep my video off just so it doesn't disrupt my bandwidth. But it's great to see all of you back. It hasn't been that long. With me today, we have the full panel. Sharon Bradley, Kevin Storm, and Osborne Anthony. We're excited to see the development of your project. This is its second presentation, and opposite to what we did in the first one, which was about walk us through your project, walk us through the background, the site planning, and this and that. Subsequent presentations are organized based on the panel's comments. So as you go through your presentation today, please make sure to address each comments directly, even if your presentation isn't organized in showing kind of the previous version, the new version. It is important to highlight to the panel what has changed since last time we've seen things. You know your project far better than we do, so we won't be able to very quickly scan that in one slide. So we rely on your description specifically that shows what are the specific things that have been altered so that perhaps certain things are addressed. Even if things have not changed with respect to the panel's comments, which is perfectly fine, we expect to hear sort of your thoughts and studies on it, just so that we can understand what's worked, what hasn't, and where has the project arrived. Let's see, let's give the presentation about 20-25 minutes. And at that point, we'll be able to ask questions, and obviously I'll offer comments. The quicker we move through the initial slides, the more time we'll have at the back end. Without any further ado, please take it away.
Understood, and thank you for having us back. We're excited to showcase some of the developments that we've made. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So today we'll start off by some quick words from Lady Brianna and Todd, just about a bit more background about the vision for the Sanaa Center complex and some of the programming requirements. We'll then review the feedback and then take a look through our response approach, first looking at programming and then the site plan, as well as some facade updates. So I will hand it over to Lady Brianna and Todd first.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having us back. I wanted to speak specifically on the Sanaa Center side. I know there was a ton of conversation around the backside of the building where our theater is located, or our multi-purpose performance space is located, as well as the art walk. So I wanted to speak to those two specifically. As we know, the Sanaa Center is intended to be a culture and art hub. It will also anchor the Black Arts District in the physical district itself, where our headquarters is, as well as a number of other types of programming. After doing a business plan that was supported by Barco, who runs or has created similar types of creative enterprises like Motorhouse. We talked about what would be the revenue drivers for the building. One of the larger ones is this multi-purpose performance space, which has been recommended to hold at least 300 seats within the space, and be able to be used from everything from theater kind of space to have banquets, to have weddings, to have community meetings, like really running the gamut. And so what you see with the design of this building and where it is situated both speaks to the way it would have to be designed to be able to hold all of those kinds of events, to be able to hold that number of people, and really make sure the remaining floor plan has an attractive flow and is inviting to the public. So that also speaks to the art walk that we talked a ton about at our last UDAAP presentation as well, which for us, our intention for the art walk is for it to be able to be a communal space where people can gather, for it to be an intentional open space that flows between the two sites of Intersection of Change building and the Sanaa Center, because although these are two separate sites, we're in community together and we'll be doing art programming between both buildings. And so having a space where you can flow sort of in between, be able to activate the space, increase the visibility, have art displayed throughout this art walk. And the programming that we imagine to happen here would be outdoor festivals spilling into that parking lot that we have behind the building. So being able to activate that in addition to the art walk collectively for festivals, pop-ups, being able to do gatherings, being a place of respite for folks who come and visit between the buildings or work there, and really also serving as its own artistic destination in West Baltimore and in the Black Arts District, like we've seen for other art walks in the region. So I will stop there, but I did want to speak to those particular parts of our building.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lady Breon. Todd, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add, but...
Yeah, thank you, Lady Breon. And I just wanted to add that we really recognize that a lot of the panel feedback and questions for consideration did focus around that portion of the art walk last time. And so I think that, these are a lot of things that we were already thinking on and strategizing on. And our hope is that as we give the presentation today, you're going to see some more of the many nuances and details of how we have just incorporated that in our design and our approach, really also to maximize usage of the space, security of the space, given that amidst all of the work we've done revitalizing most of the vacant buildings in our intersection over the past 25 years, we still do have to be mindful of different activity. And so I think that we have a pretty thoughtful strategy where our design integrates all of that, whether it's the art walk or even thinking about some of the panel's feedback at our last meeting about the rear of the building, the theater space, which is a larger wall, and how that is integrated with the view for our community residents that live there on the Brunt Street alleyway. So excited for your thoughts on everything as Lola Day takes us through.
Panel, just to be completely direct, what they're speaking to is why the building encroaches on the alley. I know that was a big thing, the alley connection between it. That was the reason why they're speaking to it as part of the business plan, that the theater has to be a certain size, which necessitated us encroaching on the alley. Take it away, Lola Day.
I just want to pause here for a minute. Thank you, Chris, for this clarification. Can we do what I suggested and focus on the panel's comments? Because I think everything you're saying will find its direct way into why things are done the way they are. And this is exactly what I'm hoping to avoid, is a lot of general speak about things, because we really want to get down to what are the things we identified last time that aren't quite working, and what are the things that can be done or that you've already done that can make them work better. I think that's what's going to give us the best use of our time today. And I think from that point of view, thank you for the initial introduction. I think we heard it last time and we understand perfectly what the intention of this project is. And this is exactly the lens through which we're looking at it as well. We want this to be the most famous art walk in Baltimore region. We don't have a ton of art walks around here, right? This is the arts district. There is no other agenda here other than making this absolutely successful when it comes to its functionality, when it comes to its safety and security, when it comes to its sort of excitement and energy and ability to, serve as catalyst for this neighborhood. Please know this entire panel sees it from that perspective alone, and that's the only way we're looking at it as well. Now, this is a technical design review. So from that point of view, what we're here is to provide comments on how can we best accomplish your goals. Because we don't have anything, we don't have a horse in this race. This is your project, your goals. And as a matter of a panel that assists Baltimore Planning is we're reviewing it as an outside view to see how well your design is approaching the goals that you're doing and how well is it really contributing to the rest of the city from its urban perspective. That's why naturally we didn't look at the interior spaces and how those are laid out. You know, we trust that the design team obviously handles that completely, and the focus here is entirely on how the building integrates with its community, with its urbanity. What are the kind of spaces it creates? Are they safe? Are they going to function the way you want them to function? That's really the lens through which we're looking at it. So I really suggest we get into it and really focus on the specific items. I think that's why it's important sometimes, you know, when you just show images, that it's important that we talk about specifically what the design is doing, right? So sometimes the renderings, you know, can be helpful. Sometimes they're not, because if something is failing without the materials on, it probably isn't going to succeed with the materials, or rather the other way. If it's not working without the materials on, it's probably not going to work with the materials on as well. So I think it's important to just get right to these comments. And Chris, I count on you, since you've done this a few times here, to, you know, help summarize maybe sometimes if a specific element that's shown in images that maybe we want to see or appreciate, if it's approaching a specific design comment, I think that's going to help us really read it the right way. Thank you all. Please take it away.
We'll roll directly to the comments. Thanks, Lola Day.
Yep, no problem. So we separated the comments into three categories. First, site and building layout. Second, the art walk. And third, facade articulation. For the site and building layout, there was a comment about, you know, wanting to understand a bit further about how we got to where we were and keeping other options in mind. There was also a concern about, as we mentioned, the building extending into the alleyway and altering the circulation of the block and resulting in a dead-end space, and also the idea that our 360 programming falls apart. So we will address those in the oncoming slides. For the art walk, there was, you know, a comment about the art walk needing to be extended, that it's currently functioning as an alley or a narrow space because of the lack of vegetation and blank walls on both sides, and then just concerned generally about accessibility and site organization, which we've taken a look at the site plan. And again, we'll address those comments. And then lastly, facade articulation, just wanting to continue the thought that was showcased in the front facade to the rear. So from that, I'll jump through the programming recap. We did want to start with alternate programming plans, not necessarily to look at the, you know, nitty-gritty of the internal building layouts, but because due to the heavy reliance on the internal programming of the building, just wanting to walk you through some of our thoughts that brought us from where we were to where we are today with the layout. Looking at we did look at options that did not extend into the alley due to concerns in being with the inadequate back of house space to support the theater of the size that we needed, and also a lack of daylight and access to the art alley from public facing spaces. We did not go with this route. We also looked at additional options that did not fully extend into the alley that preserved more of an additional connection. This also resulted in some issues from a security perspective, et cetera, into the building, as well as extensive circulation, and then a lack of daylight into studio spaces that needed them, as well as security and circulation concerns on the interior of the building. So we did look at some alternate studies that looked at different ways of massing of the building so that it allowed for further alley connections, but ultimately due to the programming needs of the interior, that is how we ended up where we are currently. After the comments that we received back, with the understanding that we did want to, create some sort of connection through the block rather than just ending at the Brent Alley, we are proposing to overtake the entire alley. So rather than it being a dead end at the end of the buildings, it actually continues and arcs to the left out onto Pressman Street. And we'll walk through a bit how we envision that working as well. We've also taken a look at greenery locations, and we'll take a look at that in a minute at a sort of greened out site plan. As we were hearing feedback about what we think an art alley is going to be, we wanted to also include some precedents of how we were as a team thinking of the art alley and how building spaces in between buildings that are narrow do function for that purpose. So we wanted to do a scale study comparison, one for Graffiti Alley, which is in Baltimore, another for John F. Collins Park, which is in Philadelphia, noting that the width for the Graffiti Alley is 8 to 15 feet. The width for the John F. Collins Park is 20 feet, and we're right in that 10 to 20 foot width. First, looking at Graffiti Alley in Baltimore, noting that even though it is devoid of greenery, it still becomes a very active art space. It also makes a similar L, which allows people to be drawn throughout the space, as it is an alley that goes through the rear of buildings. It also becomes a program space where people come and they interact with the building's facades to create graffiti and create art, and becomes a hangout space as well as a destination for photography. Taking a look at John F. Collins Park, which is again a 20-foot sort of alley park in between two buildings in a busy retail corridor, noting that while it is small, they've used plantings that are in shade most of the time, but they do allow for different types of seating and events to happen there. It's often, again, even though it's narrow, it's often used for weddings. They have, wine happy hours, etc., other programming for the public, even though it is a narrow format, because it does sit right within that commercial corridor. And there are still ways that they've incorporated greenery. And then wanting to take a look at how we're thinking about ours, and we'll take a further dive into this as well, but knowing that we are similarly arcing and we are within that 10 to 20 foot space, wanting to allow spaces for greenery where we think that we can reasonably fit them in, as well as creating moments for that art display throughout the art alley. Again, just wanting to further develop the program types that we see happening there: leisure, art display, performance, and a pop-up market, as well as spaces for murals, built-in outdoor seating, etc., step seating that could also function as a stage, using it as a space that could be a pocket park for events, and then finding areas to locate parklets throughout the entire site. And that really, we see this as sort of a mosaic or collage of those activities happening within the art walk. Taking a look at the site plan itself, so we have located small amounts of greenery towards the edge of the building that we do believe will receive the most light. I know some of the concern that we had previously was making sure that the whole space is ADA accessible due to some constraints around the actual grading heights. We do have a ramped entry as well as a sort of more aggressively ramped walking surface, but once you're in the art walk itself, it is all graded at a accessible level, so you can flow from the front all the way out to Pressman Street. We are locating fencing at the front that can be operable, with the idea that we are no longer fencing in the parking lot, so it feels like less closed off from the community, and also just allows for a freer flow through when these gates are opened. We are also proposing using some of the space that we have within the parking garage that is facing the street as locations for further art and parklets. So this space we're proposing to be used as a small sculpture garden or feature sculpture, and this space is a small parklet. I know that there was a lot of concern in terms of how we are facing the residents across the street, and so we did want to call out the new trees, street trees that we'll be adding, as well as just some additional shrubbery, so that their view is not just directly at cars parking. And we've also taken a look at including open pavers here rather than asphalt or hard turf, so again, it's a softer approach to the neighborhood, as well as wanting to call out the street trees that we'll be adding towards the front. Taking a look in terms of how we envision the space being programmed, I know there was also concern about the art alley and the location of the cafe not necessarily functioning in its highest value. So we did just want to show in an everyday scenario, we envision the art alley being opened, the cafe having a secondary entry here off of the art alley so that it's activating this connection. And the idea being, if there's programming or an event going on within the cafe, that it has free flow out into the art walk itself. Towards Lady Breon and Todd's point, also thinking of this space being used as potentially an outdoor market that could flow into the parking lot, something like a farmer's market on the weekends. And then additionally, because the art alley is small, using it for different types of programming, maybe more of a walking display for art within it, and then using the larger open footprint that we have at the rear of the building for outdoor performance and larger gatherings. I will jump quickly, because I know we're on time, to the updates to the exterior axon that we've made. Mostly, I know there was a concern around the facade that we put a lot of thought and articulation into the front facade, but that was missing towards the sides and the rear. So we did make some updates in terms of how we are continuing that articulation around the facade. Primarily bringing what you see as these motif panels or relief panels around the edge of the building, allowing us to frame in those art moments, so using them almost as framed canvases rather than just washing the entire facade with murals. Similarly, on the back, although we are still keeping the same articulation, bringing some of that vertical articulation around, again, framing out those mural moments and adding a mural at the lower level so that that is what is being seen by the residents across the street. So this is the view on the other side. And then taking a look at the front elevation, just wanting to show, that we are using the murals and the art both as art display for the art walk, but also to draw someone's eye into the space. Taking a look at the rear facade, just showing the planting edge that we're allocating, as well as the small sculpture garden and pocket park, as well as the open open pavers there. I'll skip that for now. Just another view of the rear, a view inside of the art walk in terms of how we see the fencing working, that it's a part of the decorative panel of the facade, seeing the facade panels work their way around, and again, framing in these art moments on either side of the building, and then using that feature mural in the back to draw people through the space. We've also allocated some built-in seating here, both to work as built-in seating for an everyday use, but also to be potentially used as a stage if there is outdoor programming out here against the building, which again has windows of the existing building that look out on the art alley. Taking a look at the facade on Pressman Street with the fence that looks at the side approach of the narrower. So again, using the murals as a way to bring life to the space, but also draw participants in, as well as potentially street floor murals as well. Taking a look at that, we know that in narrow spaces, lighting is of concern. So thinking about where we want to locate up and down light sconces, windows towards the rear, which we'll take a look at in a second, that allow visual access to the space, as well as more lighting and string lights throughout the space. We'll skip that again. Just taking a look, I know we've looked at the front facade, of which there were not many updates, maintaining that, but wanting to bring some of that language to the rear, also wanting to highlight the datums that we are drawing across both facades, as well as where we do have windows and visual access located for the art alley. So this is the rear of the Harris Marcus Center. And then looking at the side facade of the Sanaa Center, again, wanting to note that we have continued the glazing further into the art walk and added double doors to promote that connection more strongly throughout the space. And then bringing those motif or vertical panels to really continue the rhythm from the front facade and use it as a way to frame these mural moments. And you can kind of see the ramping down. And then taking a look at the side facade of the Harris Marcus Center as well, wanting to note that we're bringing something similar with the motif panels all the way around and using it as a way to locate that glazing, so allowing more of a visual connection onto the art alley where we can, and again, using the part of the facade that we need for solid program for the egress stair for a mural display moment or sort of a framed mural moment. The section has stayed the same, so I'll walk past that. And then this is just a closer look. One thing we did want to highlight here is, again, there was a concern about the cafe and how it interacted with the space generally and allowing for more access. We did push the cafe space back to allow for a larger gathering space here, as well as a larger door here, with the idea being that this could be used as an entry when this is open off of the street edge as well, and just promotes more connectivity across. So I will stop there because I know we wanted to keep it tight to 25 minutes.
Thank you for your presentation. So I would go to my original request, and I would like to ask you to go back to your drawings and show us what has changed since last time, especially with respect to our comments, and what hasn't.
Yep, absolutely. So the first change that happened here, and I'll note this again, we previously had the art alley stopping here, so you walked in towards a dead-end fence and then were required to turn around or walk onto a public alley. We have now taken over the entirety of the alley, and it now makes an L so that we are owning all of this space. It is all at an inaccessible grade once you walk in, so it is kind of a pathway as you walk through the buildings rather than dead-ending at this public alley. We have, so that's the primary change number one. Change number two for the rear parking lot is that we have added in the public spaces that we could add more greenery. We are showing the street trees, the shrubbed fence. We are using the leftover green spaces for a sculpture display or an integrated art moment with greenery here, as well as a small pocket park here. So those are the changes to the site plan that we've made. Again, just noting some of the programming and where we drew our inspiration for our definition of the art alley. In terms of the actual facade, we previously, let me just go to those. We previously did not show these elevations, and so I realized that there was some concern in terms of how we were treating the interior edges of the building. And so partially what we have done is brought more the vertical language of the front and wrapped it around the side so that it continues that language and also allows for framing of these art moments. We've also extended the glazing further into the art alley to allow for more connection and more visual access to it in the front. And on the Harris Marcus side, we've continued the vertical panels that are on the front to continue the language, as well as added additional punches and openings throughout so that there's more visual access to the art alley and visual connection to the program spaces that are happening within the building. I understand that this is not floor plan focused, but part of what we did do in order to be able to extend the greenery, to extend the connection, was to push back the cafe space and our egress stairs so that we were allowing more glazing and visual connection across the front portion of the art walk where we could get it. There was also concern about ADA access to the space, and so where we previously had kind of an end to this and then a U-shaped ramp and steps, we've added a ramp at the front and a grade here so that once you are onto the art walk, it is all a consistent grade so you can consistently walk through without having to step down or ramp down. So it's more of a consistent experience through the block. And I will stop there as a summary of how we've addressed the comment.
Okay, so the alley pavement here, the two pocket parks, and the windows on the side of the art walk by the door there.
Just to be clear, it's not the alley pavement. The alley did not it did not connect to Pressman Street on the left. Here. We actually extended the art walk fully through so you can have circulation.
What exactly are you extending? What is the treatment that you're extending?
So previously, we were essentially owning just this portion of the alley and maintaining this as public alley. So we were not treating this alley, and we had a fence that stopped here. Now we are treating it as a portion of our art walk. So yes, the actual sort of paving and striping and muralization of the surface of it is a part of our scope, as well as adding in built-in seating and performance space so that it becomes more active. And then locating our fencing so that it really does feel like a consistent experience as you walk through, rather than ending it at this moment. And then turning it back over to public space. Again, there was also a concern about this kind of being a dead-end space that no one would enter, and there were security concerns about what would happen here. And so rather than have that be sort of the primary end of both the public alley and our private art walk alley, we've continued it in an L shape so that it has more of a directional focus throughout the block.
And so is that space secure now there in the corner? Is that that behind a fence? There's a fence around the property on the back street side?
So on the back street side, there is not a fence. That was a decision that was made by ownership because they did not want to fence off this entire space. There is a fence here that can be open and closed as needed, but this whole space stays open, again, primarily so we can give over the pocket park and sculpture garden to the community, and also so we're not, turning our backs and fencing off this space, but there is a security fence here with the idea that these could be open, throughout the day, and this space could really work as a free-flowing space.
And so that other alley that comes from that other street does dead end at the building? The one between the ramp and the existing buildings?
This one?
Yeah, that alley, that one comes and dead ends at the building now, right?
It does. Right now, it's not so much an alley as it is a sort of easement for utilities. There's fencing
it's overgrown. It's overgrown grass right now. There is no connection, no walkability. It's just overgrown grass in the back of the fences for those houses. There's no alley, no circulation.
There's fencing here.
There's fencing for the properties, and then...
And then there's just grass. There's no walkway or anything. You can't perceive it as an alley when you're there. You can just perceive it in plan.
But one can walk in there, right? So if one walks between the ramp and that, they will arrive at the building right now, right? That's a walkable area there.
Correct, it is a walkable area. I mean, again, to Chris's point, it is overgrown grass, so I'm not sure that anyone currently walks on it, but it is, yes, a walkable surface. But because we're not fencing this off, the idea is that you could kind of flow through here as well if you wanted, rather than going here and kind of dead-ending into this portion.
So from that little pocket park you have there, there's no connection to the art walk?
There is. If you want to go to the art walk, you can, walk here and go up through this area. The idea being that when these are connected, it's more of a deliberate programming decision for, if there's overflow from this space, as well as if we want to open it during the day, this fence can be opened and you can flow through all of the spaces.
Wait, so the ramp from the parking lot delivers you to the art walk?
It does, yes. So the grade here is 178. Our grade of the art walk is at 182, and the grade of our sidewalk slopes from 180 to 185. So we're trying to negotiate all of those different grade differences in order to make the art walk a smooth, walkable, consistent surface. We chose the same grade as the Sanaa Center so that we could, and as close to sidewalk grade as we could in the front so you can get through. Just for access purposes, the parking lot had to be at the lower 178 grade, but to navigate that, we have an accessible ramp and stairway that, yes, this space, once you get up here, connects you into the art walk.
So can you go to that axon that has the, let's say, festival day? Yeah. Okay. So there's an activity happening in the back in the parking lot, and there's one in the art walk. Would one have to come through the art walk, walk around the corner and engage with that other one, or would there be a connection between the art walk and the parking lot?
Can you see my cursor here?
Yes.
So there's a few ways. If I were coming from the street edge from Pennsylvania Avenue, let me correct myself, I could walk through here, go this way, and go down. If I was coming from this larger event to the rear, I could come up, walk up the ramp or stairs and go across. And if I were coming from Pressman Street, it would be a direct shot through. I would have to, kind of walk around the built-in seating, but then I would be able to go back here to this built-up platform and the ramp that gets me down to this grade.
So this is continuous then?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but it's controlled with that gate that's there so that you can open it and close it when it's needed.
It's controlled with this gate, and then there is a gate at the front as well. So essentially, if this space needs to be locked down, it can, but the idea being that it would be open and free-flowing when all the gates are open.
Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you. Other question is, we did ask last time to consider other building massing that kind of addresses the issue of the alley and all of its issues that it's creating. Did you study that?
So part of why we included these other studies at the beginning was to show some different ways that we had previously tried to address not encroaching into the alley. I know that the focus of this presentation is not interior spaces, but we are showing them as floor plans primarily because a lot of what is pushing us into the alley are the requirements for the theater space. And so we have previously looked at this option does not encroach into the alley at all, but it did not net us with enough back of house space to get us there. We looked at options that encroached into the alley slightly less so that we could create more of a connection here. But for some internal reasons and from a programming and business model standpoint, these did not work as well as our current iteration. And these are sort of two versions of the same thing where we encroach less into the alley and allow for more connection space, but due to the requirements for the programming space in the building itself for the business plan to work, that is why we ended up going with this option where it is a tighter connection.
So we can't stress enough that 300 seats is a magic number for a lot of reasons that have to do with the business plan. Mainly because if we're going to attract a certain amount of business, they need that as a minimum threshold. And so we looked at doing smaller theaters, but it did not work. In order to get to 300 and also to get the proper loading in the back of the building to be able to support the type of theater troops that have the 300 seat performances, we needed to land on the layout that we did. But we studied, Lola Day just put up there, we've studied about 6 different ways to figure this out. And this was the one that met the most of our goals.
I think what we were asking for is to study, to to consider the math, because you have other studies that don't involve the art walk, the linear art walk. So that's the one that's kind of compressing you and limiting you to the amount of space you have on the right. What we were asking for is to keep the massing open and consider if there's a different configuration that doesn't encroach on the back alley indeed, but not necessarily keeping the art walk in that particular configuration. Because you showed an example with it being more oriented towards Pennsylvania Avenue. You had a few variations of that. So not necessarily keeping the art walk in this linear tight formation, but considering the massing that solves that allows you to have the theater you want, but without encroaching on the alley in the back, and perhaps reconfiguring some of the art walk. Because that was the whole question too, is like, is this the best space in terms of that very narrow space, or is there a better type of space that also allows you not to encroach in the back? I think that was the discussion from last time. I think it's clear that when you jog it like that, it's because you're running out of space, and what's on the right because you're constrained by the art walk. So that's what we were looking forward to seeing, is like some study of your program that actually solves things, you know. If you go back to your plan, the current one, I think someone had mentioned before if it's possible for some of this program, I can't point here obviously, but if some of the program can fill up that deeper side of the alley, right, and so that the alley can distribute more towards Pennsylvania Avenue and then, you know, tuck things around. I think that's the kind of level of study and development that we expect to see that actually addresses the comment, you know, tries to solve it rather than, you know.
Can you help me understand what you're saying, Fabian? I'm not sure I follow. You want us to close the art walk? You want us to have the building encroach further into the art walk and just get rid of its current configuration?
I think what we were talking about last time is that you had a few massing studies. Do you remember the last slide had like 3 massing studies? One that had this alley, and I'm calling the art walk an alley. I'm sorry, it's the narrow art walk. Let's do that, because I think that's where the confusion is coming from. So one had the art walk, which is this narrow space. Another one had it oriented, not cutting through the property later, but like oriented along Pennsylvania. And you had another scheme with it being all the way here on the right side, right? So what we were saying is, are there other massing, like keeping the massing options open? Are there other solutions that allow you to have the theater, but not encroach on that back alley if that art walk isn't there constraining you right now? So you see how right now, because your art walk is at a minimum, right? It's like 10 feet wide, right? And it's still not giving enough space on the right to fit the theater without encroaching onto the alley. Is there a different massing configuration where that art walk isn't there eating up space from the building, but it's more along the front or wherever you want it? You're the designers, right? But the question was, is there a different massing configuration and configuration for that art walk that doesn't constrain you, so you don't have to jut into the alley? That was the discussion from last time.
So maybe we should have shown an image with this, but the alley does not continue through the street. The alley currently dead ends at Upton Boxing, which is the grayed out box right there. So it's not a continuous alley right now. It's not something that people walk through. It's already cut off. We're not getting rid of the connection.
I think we understood that, and
exist.
I think what Kevin was talking about last time was like, what if you can, then you can use that alley, go to Boxing, turn over, and come back to the street, just so that it becomes, in fact, part of this movement. I think the idea here is that you're sort of bifurcating it, and you're creating kind of like these leftover spaces that now we have to connect through that ramp, right? So the idea was, is there a better massing solution for the building that doesn't have to do that? Those were the studies we were hoping to see today that just tries to solve this. I think what you've done here is kind of make what you've created work, you know? But that's why I'm asking, like, if you've studied anything more, what has changed? And it seems like it's mostly the treatment of the outdoor species, but you haven't really studied the massing. Is that fair to say? You haven't studied changing it, or okay, I got it.
Yeah, we haven't studied changing it since
I got it.
Our meeting.
Yeah, so the schemes you're showing are things you've studied before, and it's showing why it's jutting, but it hasn't been addressed.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Although I will say for the massing options that were at the end of the previous presentation, we did study many other massings. I think we showed them to show the evolution of how we got from where we were to where we are. Part of the concerns of those massings is I understand, we're kind of having a programmatic discussion, and we're also, you are more, maybe not more focused, but focused on the result of those programmatic discussions. And so I understand that there's a marriage of them, that we're looking to make sure that we address all of our programmatic issues with maintaining this public space that functions the way that we, I think, all want it to. Part of what wasn't shown in those previous massing studies was the internal organization of the program within them, and why they fell apart for those reasons, that they didn't meet the interior programmatic requirements.
I just want to be sorry, Lode. I want to be clear that we did not redraw them because we drew them before we originally came to you. So we are being responsive to the comments. I just want to stress that we did not redraw them because we did study them beforehand, and we're coming to you and showing what we already did study, and that's how we got here. But we did look at the alternate scenarios that you're talking about.
Right. What I was saying is the massing studies that we didn't show, there were levels of program that were built into those massing studies in terms of where we could locate a theater, where we could locate some of the other program. And the reason we neglected to move forward with those were because they did not work from like an interior perspective of the programming and business plan requirements.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is that this particular scheme is favored, and you're here because it prioritizes fitting the programmatic requirements, and so sort of working with the remainings around the site, and that's a valid kind of part of the process, right? I think what you'll hear kind of going forward is that it's an inside out and an outside in approach, right? So that also is a balance, and I think that's probably where we intersect today, and what we'll probably spend the rest of our time discussing. Thank you for the clarifications and for addressing this. I want to hand it over to the rest of the team and see if they have any clarifying questions. Osborne, do you have any questions for the team?
Sure, I'm sorry, I was on mute there. Just one or two very quickly. I'm going to start at the opposite end. So, it is an art center. I get that. Great approach. But my question again goes back to murals.
Mm-hmm.
Are these murals permanent, or are they interchangeable? I mean, what's the plan?
I think the intent with the murals is to, again, set them up as outdoor canvases for artists within the community to come and have their work represented on the building. So they're not just an art production center within the building, but they are also showcasing the artwork of the Black Arts District on the exterior of the building as well. I think from a programmatic standpoint, part of why we showed the graffiti alley is there is a more temporary or iterative nature to those murals because they're added onto over time, and so it becomes a more interactive experience. And I think we're certainly interested in locating that somewhere within this art alley or art walk experience. But I think for the larger murals that are showcased on the facade of the building, the idea is for them to be large exterior outdoor art pieces for the community to participate in that way.
What does that mean? They're permanent. So once they go up, you can't change them.
Right.
Permanent. Well, semi-permanent, right? Because that's the way murals work. They have a lifespan, and then you typically have to either update them or refresh them, and typically the artwork can change. So, I mean, permanent-ish, yes.
Okay, I'll take that to mean permanent versus something you can go and change with every new artist that comes into town. It's kind of what I'm getting at. Okay, that's fine. The second question is, and it's probably be a little bit edgy, but have you actually looked at an auditorium that could potentially be on the second floor?
So part of the concerns about locating an auditorium on the second floor, just in terms of accessibility and flexibility, is that it does require excessive fly space. So there is kind of a minimum requirement just from like a zoning perspective of the building height. And right now we're sitting at around 37 feet clear within our theater space. So if we were to move it up to the second story, we would be kind of towering over the rest of the neighborhood, understanding that we're still taller than most of what's going on in the neighborhood. But we have not necessarily pursued that option. Also, from just a functional standpoint, from loading, et cetera, it does, add more circulation on inside of the building to allow for the serious loading functions that need to happen for a second floor theater.
Got it. Okay, and then the load and dock area as shown.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the only configuration of the ramp that you looked at? Have you looked at one potentially that runs along the length of the alley towards the boxing center?
Oh, yeah, let me go. Sorry, really quickly. So you're talking about a ramp that goes this way?
Yes, some as opposed to kicking out towards the street.
So I think we have not drawn that out. I think we ruled it out mostly because we were concerned about conflicting with the loading zone if we were to kind of bridge in front of that, and then also reducing our amount of parking. So we have not drawn it out, but we did consider other ramp orientations. This is what we landed on in order to be able to preserve the parking as well as add for ease of loading into the back of the theater without kind of confusing the pathways, if that makes sense.
Okay. And then two more very quick questions. I know you said you've kind of reworked the grading on the art walk to kind of provide more of a seamless ADA accessible route, to get back onto the side street there. I can't recall the name of that street.
Pressman Street.
But yet you show a connection back to the cafe. I'm wondering how that actually works, because it seems to me Pennsylvania is somewhat higher, and you're trying to negotiate a 4-foot drop at least, right?
So that's a good question. At this store, we're essentially at, I'll just give you the elevations I work with. We're at 181. What we've done is we set the art walk and the interior of the Sanaa Center at the same elevation, which means that's why when we reach this point, we are higher than the art walk, which is why we've provided a ramped pathway here and then another sloped pathway here. This is graded at 1 to 12, so it's accessible. This one is a little bit steeper of a percentage of slope to be able to get us there. But these are at the same level. And then as it works its way back, it slopes at a percentage slope that you can wheel on all the way out to the grade of this street that essentially starts dropping back down.
I see. Okay. And then my final question, if you can go back to the site plan. So that kind of area, just to the right of where you're showing the parking, but adjacent to the boxing center. What exactly is all of that area used for?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a driveway?
So it is the driveway. We are taking over essentially the portion of alley that was there. So it is our entry and driveway. There's also, just because of the closure of the alley, we need to locate a transformer. So a portion of this is also, for exterior electrical equipment, et cetera, other utility services that we will need. But this portion is the driveway that gets you through, because Brunt Street is a one-way street. To get us to the parking, we kind of enter and cut in here and exit this way. If we were to enter here, it would provide, just slightly more difficult of a pathway because we can't exit back. Yeah, it would be kind of exiting out back beyond where you came from, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Osborne. Kevin, what are your questions for the team?
Just one question, and this can be answered. I'll direct it at either the team or city staff, actually, planning staff. Who controls those L-shaped alley? Like, who owns that land? Is it city controlled, or is it controlled by you, the team?
So the city controls those currently. We had to go to city council actually to buy the first part of the alley. And then after UDAAP, we've actually gone back and we had our legal team go back and actually revise that so that we could buy the rest of it. So we're in the process of purchasing it.
So you purchased which portion?
So we were already purchasing the part that the building is encroaching over. Lode, can you highlight that?
Yeah,
That
can you
was
see
already
my,
being purchased,
sorry.
and the rest of it was going to be owned by the city. Now we've extended the purchase to go all the way out to Pressman Street to buy that so that we can make that connection based on.
And how certain is that? So it's not purchased yet? It is.
It's going through the process right now. DPW is aware, City Council, and DHCD. Everybody signed off. It's a process.
That's my only question.
Thanks, Kevin. Sharon, any questions for the team?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what's happening in the back with the ramps and so forth. So at the top of the ramp, there it looks like there are a couple questions about that. At the top of the ramp, you're at 182, and you can make your way between those two buildings through a fairly narrow slot, and you're up at the level of where the alleys makes the L. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Could you go back to the plan that would?
Yep, absolutely. So this is all at 182.
Okay, and then the shaded part at the top of the ramp, what is that indicating?
This is indicating the pathway across. It's a pathway across. There's some concerns about this being an easement required, so it's kind of bridging over that easement essentially, but it's the pathway of connection across.
And so there's now a slot at 178 between the townhouse fence and the ramp.
Correct. Yes.
So that is a
179-ish, but yeah.
A slot, a narrow slot that's 4 feet down from the top of that landing.
Give or take, yes.
Okay. What's happening with that space?
So, and Chris can probably speak a little bit more towards this. We are currently in the process of understanding who owns this space. Right now it's being used as an easement. The intent is, if we can, to take it over, and then it would be sort of a planted area next to us, and we would potentially be allowed to put a fence and control that portion of it. So it's just more planting, but because there are some public utilities that run through it, we're trying to gain a better understanding of exactly how much we can, kind of plant on top of it, etc.
Okay. And otherwise you can go into the back of the building there at the top of the ramp and at the top of those stairs.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And there's loading right there.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the trash?
The trash is located here within the building, the trash room, essentially, where you see this door. It's located right here. But from the interior, it's accessible out here as well. That makes sense.
How is it collected? Where does the trash truck go?
That's a good question. I think we're still in the process of working through that, but because it's sort of trash is collected here within the building, and then there's the larger exit point, the idea being that it's an internal dumpster that then is, taken care of out the rear of the building that can be rolled across through this.
Yeah, so there would be rollable dumpsters, and there's actually a garage door right there for easy access between it. So maintenance staff within the building would roll the dumpsters out. The trash truck would back up into the loading area right there.
Okay. Okay. And then you said the bottom right of that parking area is utilities, transformer type things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Moving down to the southern end of the art walk, could you walk us through what is that vertical transition from the street, Pennsylvania Avenue, up 4 feet into, or several feet? Can you just tell me the change of grade there and how that's being navigated with ADA compliance?
Yep, absolutely. So our grade here is at 183.25, and this is at 182. So it's about a foot and some change difference between here and here. So we have our accessible ramp that's at 1 to 12 that hugs the side of the building that gets you to this point. Then we have a steeper sloped, about 7% ramp that is here for like a walkable surface, as well as, if something does need to wheel onto the surface, like a larger equipment, etc., or something, if there's loading going on for an event out here, that they can use that surface. But because the grade essentially, it slopes from 181 here up to 186 on this corner and then back down to 178. So it's kind of, yeah, it's moving up and then back down, if that makes sense. But at this point in front of the art walk, we're at 183.
Okay, so the accessible walk, the ADA compliant walk is the one that hugs the building.
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right. I believe those are my questions. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sharon. And just to complete it while we're here, so we stepped down about a foot or so from Pennsylvania into this, and then we're at the end of the art walk. Instead of going left back to the street, you said gradually that slopes down to meet the street again. If we go to the right, we will be still at the grade of the art walk, arriving at that platform. And then from there, we're going how much down?
Down to 178. So
what's
4
the
feet.
difference? I can't see the numbers. Yeah, 4 feet.
Oh, sorry, it's 4 feet
down. Okay. So if this is a continuous alley now, how is that 4 feet lower? And what is happening to the grade? At what point are you retaining 4 feet of a difference? And where is the grade actually changing from the natural grade? Is the parking lot remaining at natural grade and then the art walk's getting built up? Or I'm just trying to understand.
So right now, the way that this currently works is essentially this is at around 182. It grades down slightly, but then there is a, I wouldn't say dramatic, but a potentially 2-foot grade change from here, from like the edge of the existing alley down to what is street level here. So there's already a significant grade change from what is street level for these lots and what is street level for these lots. So we would be retaining at this edge, which is consistent with where there's already a more significant drop in grade in between the two front and rear lots, or collection of front and rear lots.
I got it. Okay. Thank you so much. Understood. All right. Going back around to Osborne. Osborne, what are your comments for the team?
Sure, thank you. So, I mean, thanks for kind of walking through those grades and elevation changes and so forth, because I was really having a problem and I thought my math was just off, but obviously there's a method to the madness. So thanks for that. But I will say this though, I think for the most part, somehow in the design process, and it could be mainly because of the program and decisions you've made, I think in summary, you've painted yourself into a corner, unfortunately. And a lot of it maybe relates to the programming, how you've organized the programming in the building, the priorities that you've indicated to some degree. But I think it's not necessarily working the way I would come to expect a project like this to work. And I don't know that that's a personal comment, but I think it's really more just a case of giving yourself sufficient time to work through and really, really work through the challenges at hand. And that initial discussion there at Pavlina in terms of, trying to get to the brunt of why exactly is the alley being closed off? Did you really need to do that? And it seems as though it's a decision that was taken relatively early on in the project. But I don't know that it's a decision that you really needed to make so soon. And one of the reasons I did push back a little bit and ask the question, have you actually studied an auditorium that sits on the upper floor? I think that could have been part of your solution. Even if that auditorium partially extended over the alley, at the ground floor level, you can now maintain and retain the visual and physical connection between the alley, as in the art walk section of the alley, the art walk section, and let's say the parking lot. But we've kind of created this situation where it's almost as if the programming elements of the building are kind of flipped, right? We're putting all of the guts of the building, the pieces, the maintenance, the trash, the deliveries, the staging areas, loading areas, etc., kind of like at the worst point possible, which is the point at which you really want to connect the artwork back to that open space. And early in the process, you did mention that, well, you'd potentially like this to be used as well for maybe a farmer's market or more outdoor type activities. How can you have a big outdoor type activity with such a minuscule and kind of like a chokehold connection between the artwork back to that main open area? I would almost go to the extent of saying to you very clearly and very publicly, in my opinion, that's somewhat of a flaw in the design. So I won't say, I think you can work your way out of that, right? Unfortunately, you're pretty far along in the process, but I think you have to break a little bit of eggs here on the ground floor in terms of how some of these spaces come together. And without necessarily changing much of the configuration of the main auditorium, perhaps it needs to be kind of pushed a little bit out of the alleyway, and maybe some of the intervening spaces adjacent to it on Pennsylvania Avenue, you would have to give up something and rework that a little bit. Because I think right now, if I were coming to a major event here, let's say on a Saturday, and there's a farmer's market, there's a great event occurring in the art walk, I would want to know that I can just easily saunter from the art walk back into that larger outdoor space. And it's really not happening at the moment, to the point where I would almost argue that it's marginally not safe. So I would ask you at least first to reconsider how the ramps work there. If there's an opportunity to rotate the ramp and have the ramp tuck up against the building, there's a lot you can do from a landscaping perspective, even from an architectural perspective, to make that work. And I know you're concerned that you will lose parking spaces, but I don't necessarily think so. I think there's a way you can arrange the parking so that you still have the same number of parking spaces or potentially even more. The other question is the ramp solely for ADA access between the art walk and the open parking lot area, or is it meant to be used as a way of wheeling a dolly up to the loading dock? I don't know. That was not necessarily made clear to me. But I think you have the ability to still provide loading without that ramp being sort of a, because if you kind of look at it, you're kind of working against your grades, right? If you think about it, that's one of the reasons the ramp is so long, because everything slopes down to the street. So I think that's one aspect of the project that you really need to develop a little bit better. And, hopefully identifying the ownership or the utilization of that narrow alley that continues out to the street may help you negotiate that a little bit better. The other point that I want to just quickly touch on is I appreciate the fact that you're trying to negotiate an clearly accessible route along the art walk all the way over to Bunt, all the way over through Bunt Alley. But one of the consideration, again, which comes back to programming, you've got this kind of a stair that's intervening onto the alleyway from the Marcus Center. Mm-hmm. And it just seems to me that with a slight adjustment of the floor elevations of the new building, the Marcus Center, you can give yourself an opportunity to get rid of that stair. But I don't know if that was ever truly explored, right? And the two buildings, the existing building portion of the building that's there and the one that's new, there's nothing that says the two floor elevations need to be exact. You have an opportunity within the building to negotiate a change in elevation there. Mm-hmm. But I'm not seeing any sort of sketches or any thought process that showed that you explored that. by getting rid of that stair, it creates so much more flexibility for what you can do with the art walk. Plus, it gives you a heck of a lot more space as well. So I would probably explore that if you still have the ability to do so. If you can go to one of the three-dimensional views, I think these are Masson studies that might have shown what's actually happening. Yeah, this one is good. So one of the reasons to why I asked about potentially locating their auditorium on the second story is I think you have the ability to do it. And I think you have the ability to do it primarily because the grades are sloping down away from Pennsylvania Avenue. So, and just looking at the way you've kind of separated the building out, yet to me, it creates a natural break that potentially allows you the opportunity to do so. Yes, you would need to get elevators up there and so forth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a lot of the staging area needs to be on the second floor. You can actually still retain that on the ground floor and in essence, minimize the amount of footprint that you need to be able to organize those elements. But what it does do is gives you back a lot of the ground floor so you can negotiate access or connectivity between the parking lot and the art walk. The one other thing that I will just question, and I'm sure you're thinking about this, is those sort of gray boxes on the roof. I would imagine they're either bulkheads for stairs, elevators, or they're probably mechanical penthouses. This building isn't very tall, so you will see that from a distance, particularly the ones that are on the Marcus Center. And I'm just curious as to how you intend to camouflage that, or if it's intended to just be fully exposed as is. But just keep that in mind. Other than that, I would say to you in summary, the architecture of the building is beginning to come together in terms of, material selection. But I still believe the organization, for the primary purpose or the primary feature of this building, the art walk, I still believe there's a lot of work to be done there. I'm hoping you can pull it off. Don't just settle at what you've got. I know you guys can do a lot better, so I'm very hopeful. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Osborne. Let's see, I had Kevin next. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Look, I love this project. I like from the first time I saw it. I think that this image, it looks comfortable. It sits on the street nicely. Kind of looks a little bit organic and quirky, but still kind of unified. And there's so many. The program's amazing. I think this new alley connection to Bund that you've done is great. I think the precedent studies and the programming and how you're going to make this alley work. I'm much more convinced this time about the potential success there. For me, even having little stairs jut into it, having it be a little bit quirky and idiosyncratic, I think that's actually fine. I think the connection to the alley of the cafe to the alley is a plus. But that all comes with, for me, just one big problem, which I guess you've heard a lot already, which is that alleys are public space. And the public realm and public space is the city's most valuable asset. It is the thing that connects all of our spaces together. It's the thing that provides places for commerce, interaction, travel, services, all of those things. And so, the gradual erosion of the public realm is widely considered as an urban design 101, not a best practice. It's not the thing to do. Many cities have made the mistakes of giving over their public spaces in ways that weren't kind of part of a broader system thinking, and they're paying the price now and trying to undo those things. So, and it's not just because, it's there that it should stay there. I mean, the reason that an alley is amazing is because it is a place that reserves in perpetuity places to run services as the block evolves. You can access, parking or garbage or have another throughway. It eliminates the need for curb cuts and unsafe vehicular crossings on sidewalks on pedestrian-friendly row house streets. I could go on and on for half an hour about what alleys do. So the idea of just assuming when you get a site that you can just occupy land that is public, right? Does not belong to the team. That's a big move, and there has to be such a compelling overarching reason. And there are probably, there are cases where that might just be the only solution. And that 100%, like, say you were putting a school there and you didn't want people driving to the playground, or there's lots of reasons one can make it fine for unmapping an alley. But, in general, if just because DPW thinks, okay, they don't need the alley this year for this reason, I mean, that's like not the way that, in my opinion, cities should be thinking about their public space networks. And that I would really, I think that, like, our colleagues who are the planning staff, I don't want to speak for them, but I work on, on planning staff in another city, and we're always fighting these challenges where this continuous erosion of the public realm was driving projects because people think it's just easier that way. Well, I mean, I'm also a designer, and the panels are designers, and I'm 100% certain that you could take your program and give it to a designer in my office, and we find a way to make that work, keeping the alley. And I think that that's 100% possible. I don't even think you could do it on the second floor. I think you could even do it on the first floor, just by adjusting, making the alley narrower, moving it a little bit to the left, or putting the alley between the site on the east. I think there's just like 10 different ways you could probably pursue this. And I guarantee you there's, I'm 100% certain that there's a solution where you don't have to go up the alley. And even if you were putting, if the purchase manages to go through and then this whole point is moot, you can do what you want. I still think it's not helping. You're not helping yourselves by doing that, because you've come up with this pinch point at the most critical moment where you're, like it's unclear whether, you should, that connection to the parking lot is going to be like you're encouraging lots of people or not, because they all have to wind on this little, at this ramp choke point, and it's making a kind of a confusing, series of like landings and spaces and loading, and frankly, like you're not being a good neighbor to the houses across the street. If you walk your kids on their tricycle or walk their hand, like the more large curb cuts encouraging vehicles to cross, like it's not the safest condition, and that's one of the reasons alleys exist. You access your parking, you access your service, your loading as much as you can from the alleys. And I know that's not always possible. Sometimes the alleys are undersized, or you have to make it an alteration. In this case, maybe there's a portion of the alley has already been eroded and cut off, and that just because that mistake has happened doesn't justify continuing to do it. Like you could end up doing that all over the whole city, and then suddenly we don't have walkable urbanism and walkable neighborhoods and safe sidewalks and that kind of thing. So for me, like it's just like it's such a great project and has so many things going for it. Just, you have good designers, like just challenge yourself to just make it work within the alley. Like don't assume that you can just build on public land. I mean, it belongs to the public. It's not. So that's my whole pitch about that. And I really feel strongly about it. I think that every city should be, really thinking hard about, anytime there's a question about demapping public space, it's a community city, like systemic issue, like, issue, and it needs to have, it has to go above and beyond in terms of justification. So I think you're so close. Like I think the project is so amazing, and like you're 7 feet like for making that solution. I mean, there's definitely a solution. So I'll just stop there. But those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Kevin. Sharon, what are your thoughts? What are your comments for the team?
I know I talked about, I asked you about your landscape architect last time, and I see the response seems to be, well, we put plants in, but that wasn't what I meant. And I want to just kind of reference your floor plans. Your floor plans are extremely thoughtful, a lot of work, a lot of thought has clearly gone into them. Scale, adjacencies, capacity, door locations, all of those things, based on your vast knowledge of what needs to happen inside the building and what makes the most sense. I'm not seeing that level of thought on the site, and that's where the landscape architect comes in. And ironically, often our work has nothing to do with plants. It's about organization. It's about scale and adjacencies and where is the door and all of those things that architects think about inside the building. We are thinking through and working out on the site. And it seems like a lot of what we're talking about today could be resolved with a landscape architect on board and fully engaged with the same level of energy and creativity and investment that you all have in the building. So it just seems like the site is 3 steps behind your building in terms of development and refinement and thought. And as the others have mentioned, you're almost there. You know, you could get there, but you need that level of refinement in the approach to your site, that level of intentionality and thought. I agree with Osborne's thought about the ramp. I think that needs to have a different configuration. Just rethinking the connection points, how the site is organized, how each area of the site speaks to other areas of the site, and how all of those spaces speak to the building. How does one make one's way through those spaces? That tight little spot there up on the landing, it's not a gracious, welcoming, intentional process. In the same way that your other spaces, the Pennsylvania Avenue facade, is so gracious, so welcoming, so vibrant. You know, again, it's your site is several steps below the quality, the design quality of your building and the way you've developed that. So what you've done deserves a site that celebrates the building and vice versa. So encouraging you to get as excited about the site, treat the site with that same level of intentionality, vibrancy, human scale, human welcoming aspect of it. I mean, you even talked about leftover green spaces. No leftover spaces. Intentionality with everything that you have there. It's a tight site, but tight sites can be super well designed and super functional for the purposes that you have. So it's a puzzle, and it needs working and refinement and thought, but it's possible. And so you have some of the basic ingredients there, the idea of activating that space in the parking area, the idea of being a good neighbor and what they're looking at back there. The ingredients are there. You just need a few more levels of thought with a landscape architect who is willing to put in the investment that you all have. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. The few things I will add are along those same lines. And I think it was important, and it's related also to some of the things that I told you when we first started, is that this really is about how can this project manifest itself in the best way to meet the goals and what you're actually trying to accomplish. And I think what you're hearing from the panel is that we absolutely are behind the program, behind kind of the attitude, the sensitivity, all of the things that you're bringing to this project and you have brought so far. You do have a very challenging site between its geometry, slopes, location, and all of that. There's a lot to solve. We're absolutely sympathetic to that. And all of the work that's been done to date has brought you here, and you've learned so much about your project and so much about the site, what works, what doesn't, all of that. I think this is not the place to stop yet. I think that's what you should be hearing from the panel. You're exactly where you are because you're studying it and you're solving it and you're trying to figure it out. It's just that at this point you've said, okay, this is it. This is the best solution that I can come up with because it meets my programmatic needs. And then we'll just solve these things around the site. And what you're hearing from us is like, don't stop here. There are a couple of more iterations that will be able to give you what you're getting so far and more. And that and more will be all of these things that right now you have to do and are trying to do just to solve the issues that the current design is creating. So would you be rather spending your design energy and time trying to solve and work around things that the current design is creating, or would you rather iterate on your design and allow yourself to modify it one or two more times so that all of these issues are solved, so you're not hitting a wall with all of these things anymore, so all your design effort and your project money can actually go towards a net benefit, right? I think that's the important thing to consider here, that every time you have to add these, regradings and ramps and, pushings ins and outs and all of that, this is energy and money spent towards merely trying to make things work. The project is still malleable. The only existing building is the one on the corner. Yes, the constraints are there with the site, but there's so many different ways still to do it. You don't have to start from scratch. You know specifically where your limitations are. And right now you've created that limitation of the narrow art walk. It is pushing you. It is making you run out of space. Even if you kept it, you can still make the one on the right work. But if it's really limiting you, then maybe it's time to really see, okay, how can I let go of one thing? Because right now something's got to give. In order for this to really sit and fit and work well, something's got to give. And you have to decide what that is, and you have to allow it to happen. And at that point, once the pieces of the puzzle click, you will no longer be fighting the site conditions, site constraints, and trying to work around it and finding all of these weird conditions. Let's stick a pocket park here or this there, just trying to make it feel better. I think a lot of the things you brought today are just that. They're just trying to make something that you've already created that isn't working well a little bit better, but you're not addressing the fundamental issue and what's actually causing it. I think what you're hearing from the panel is allow yourself and the project to get to that next iteration. I know it sounds like you've been through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but what if you're just one away, right? And that's what we're pushing for here is like give yourself the opportunity to refine it. So that it can really work. The things that are still not working for me is this whole idea that you're creating a new community and public cultural asset, and it doesn't stop with the building. The building will be gorgeous. You obviously have an incredible design talent and skill, and it would look really great. It would, if it gets executed as you've intended it, and brings all of that vibrancy and texture and quality and character to it, it will be very special. But it doesn't stop with the building. It really extends to the site. So this inside out approach of like, let's make it work. Let's get the theater we want. Let's get the places, that we want it to be, has to have that same attitude towards the site as well. Because you go $8-9 million down. I don't know what the budget exactly for this is. I forget from last meeting. But in the end, you still end up with a parking lot that's facing the neighborhood, and you're trying to plant the corners of it to soften it, and you're still just trying to extend this, alley to really make this other art walk work. If you're still sort of getting these compromises all over the place when there has been an opportunity to solve it before, then it's a missed opportunity. So I think it's really, really important to give yourself the time now so that the challenges won't stop here and with this panel and us finding this and finding that and this doesn't work and that. It will continue to happen through your remaining design process, through later sort of budgeting this and constructing it. It just evolves from there, like the issues that are being created now. So we urge you, and maybe we weren't as explicit last time, we really urge you to try to solve this, to try to make the building and its site function without sort of creating these constraints, these cutoffs, these limitations. You heard it loud and clear from one point. It's the alley and really sort of building into it. Is there a way to not do that? Is there a way to, sort of reconfigure the art walk in a way that is more generous in terms of space and then how it maybe even daylights with Pennsylvania Avenue? How do we even rework that ramp condition so it doesn't cut off the two parts of the site? How wonderful of an idea would be to be able to circulate through the art walk and then into the festival and the back. I mean, and really make that whole block, shine and function and all that. And right now there's just so many things that are in the way, and it's squirrely and busy and like trying to like walk around things and climb up levels and all of that, and there's a moment at which all of it just clicks and it just works. And we really, really hope that you get the opportunity to study it and you can take it there. Next time we see you, we're going to be, that's it. You got this. There it is. We believe that's absolutely possible, and we're rooting for the team. I don't have anything else to add. I think a lot has been said. I think we can pick on a few other things that were presented today, but I think some of the issues at hand need kind of a broader brush and kind of a fresher look to actually address and solve. Let's see, panel members, is there anything else you want to add that you perhaps didn't mention? No, thank you. Thank you to the project team. Thank you for your work. We hope to see this evolve further and address the panel's comments and concerns more head on. Planning department, back to you for any additional notes or questions or comments.
No additional questions from me. Thank you guys for your time, the panelists, as well as the development team. I've been taking notes, and I'll be in touch with those notes tomorrow, and we'll talk next steps. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you all.